So on the agenda, we are on agenda item number 2. And this is from an individual named Mari or Mary, I'm not sure, M-A-R-I Vega, 611 Oriole Boulevard, Duncanville, 75116. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I want to express support for beautifying our city, and this includes but is not limited to, point 1, keep Duncanville beautiful as recognition of pretty landscape. Point 2, the volunteer work of newly elected Councilmember Kuntz. Point 3, an aspirational wish that a resolution be made here to return Duncanville skies to be dark enough to see stars again through subpoint 1, down pointed street lights, subpoint 2, motion activated security lights, and one extra important aspect, subpoint 3, that the color temperature of the lights be not white light or daylight, but colored warm so that animals, including us humans, can get better sleep. New paragraph. It's worth mentioning that the city of Cedar Hill had a billboard recently that was about their efforts to have dark night skies. I've lived here for nearly 20 years, an escapee from big cities. It is somewhat reluctantly that I no longer can refer to Duncanville as my town, but I so appreciate the work that you all do and have done to make this entity very livable. Sincerely, Mary Vega. Okay, moving on to item number 3 on the agenda, pre-budget workshop for fiscal year 2021-2022. Discussion of topics related to current year budget and next fiscal year budget planning, including the following general topics. Turning it over to City Manager Aretha Farrell Benavides. It's all yours.
Thank you. Mayor and Council, it's a very long presentation, but we are making you copies of the slides because it's 175 pages. We've done front and back and 2 slides on each. There's a lot of information that we're going to cover today, but I'd like to start by introducing the team who's here, who participated in this process, and I'll just ask them, if you don't mind, to go around and introduce themselves and their role. Start with Ms. Jennifer.
Hello all, Jennifer Odie, Budget Administrator.
That's you, Alex.
Oh, Alex Amby, Public Information Officer.
Sheila?
Everyone's introducing themselves and their role.
Okay. Sheila Baker, Purchasing Manager.
Good to see you up and around.
Thank you.
Hannah Olson, Acting Library Director, normally Technical Services Librarian.
Good evening, Jackie Colton, Assistant Director of Public Works. Thank you.
Greg Ramey, Public Works Director.
Greg Chase, Assistant Fire Chief.
Steve Wakeland, Fire Marshal.
Sam Rohde, Fire Chief. Mark Lavigny, Interim Chief of Police.
Adina Atmore, Interim Finance Director.
Bart Stevenson, Director of Parks and Recreation.
Timothy Hamilton, Park Superintendent.
Augustine Garcia, Director of Economic Development.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Robert Rouse, Assistant City Manager.
Kristen Downs, City Secretary.
All right, thank you. I think it's important. I'd like to also highlight Adina Atmore, who is here with us for the first evening. She is our Interim Finance Director, and this marks her second week being here, assisting us in our process and helping us to do. We're going to schedule probably by not the first meeting, the second meeting in July, or the only meeting we have in July, a kind of an update and briefing based on, I believe that when you have a change of hands, specifically when it comes to financial functions, is there needs to be a briefing of what is discovered to kind of set the tone for the future. And so we'll do some more with her, and you'll hear more from her this evening. So fiscal year 2021 budget workshop. And the first thing happens is it doesn't move. That's not a good start. Not moving. It's on. We're ready to go. Okay. I'm going to talk really about the budget process. As you're aware, we've moved the process back a little bit, but also some preliminary assessments as we look at our finances, our budget process, as well as some of the organizational considerations that are going into this conversation. First thing, just to kind of go through, we've moved around the agenda just a little bit. We're going to have an overview of the process by myself. Jennifer, who has been spectacular, has taken the lead in putting together a review of our audited 1920 budget. We'll discuss the 2021 budget projections, future economic trends. Gus is going to take us through some of the factors that affect our revenue, which are our economic development trends, growth, and opportunities. Initial revenue estimates by our various sources. We'll talk about those for this fiscal year, some of the things we're considering from our tax rate to fees to potential legislative impact, and then the American Rescue Plan. And then we'll move into specific conversations about our general fund, enterprise fund, and special revenue fund. Our second section we'll talk about is our expenditure baseline, which will be Jennifer and I, and we'll talk about what has gone into our preliminary projections. And we'll talk some more about how that process works. Then our debt schedule, capital improvement plan, and bond update by Mr. Greg Ramey and Bart Stevenson. Okay. First thing that's important to me to talk about is why is the budget important? It is very important for us because it has four main goals and four main purposes. One is it's a policy document. This is supposed to be the document that sets our policy. It provides information about what we're trying to do, our goals and objectives. And one of the things that we've got to start focusing on is what are we trying to achieve? It's a plan. It's a plan of how we're going to spend our money throughout the fiscal year, how the money will come in, how this will document based on our projections, and how do we move forward. It's a guide. It tells our departments what's important to you and where you should put your resources in linking as we've got to move back into our work plan, to our day-to-day. And then it's a communication tool. It communicates to our public, to council, to staff, where we're going and creating transparency to the public about how we operate as an organization. A couple of things we've done is talked about what are the things that have impacted our finances and our budget in the past. Looking at it, there's been legislative actions that have created greater fiscal restraints. We talked a lot about the legislation that affected our property tax, but there are other legislations, whether it was the red light cameras or legislation on building codes and what you can and cannot require. Those are the things that we've got to pay attention to, and we'll talk some more about those. Another thing that affects us is limited new land for economic development. We are pretty built out, as we always talk about, and so when we look at that new land that's coming in, what we can do, we have a limited opportunity. So we've got to focus more, and we'll talk about it with Gus on revitalization and redevelopment. COVID-19, we can't talk enough about how that's impacted the past 2 fiscal years and what it looks like going into the next fiscal year. Competing for employees with surrounding jurisdictions. There are 37 cities within a 20-mile radius. And as we start to see our decisions are being made from not only hiring but retaining employees, we find that it's often that we are competing. Our neighboring jurisdictions, I'll have them called. Do you have somebody that I can steal? That's what we see happening. We just lost our assistant director, Tia, most recently to the city of Cedar Hill because there is a shortage of folks in the financial fields. Attracting higher tax yielding business opportunities. What does that mean in short is we've got to look when we start to do our recruitment as what are the things that bring in. There are lots of businesses in the city of Duncanville, but we also have businesses that don't yield revenue from a sales tax or other revenue. So for example, a lot of our cosmetic things like our hair salons and nail salons do not yield the type of revenue that we're trying to bring in to start to affect our tax base. And so we have auto repair shops. So we've got to look strategically at our comp plan, tying that into our economic development. Limited housing, commercial, and new development. If you start to look, as we start to drop into our CAD, our overall development for real estate, we'll find that our property tax is not impacted where others are at a higher level because we don't have a lot of new construction. And so when you look at some of our other surrounding jurisdictions, although the values have stayed steady, they have the new construction to assist in the revenue when it comes to real estate tax. Same thing with limited redevelopment and reinvestment in commercial buildings. Gus is going to talk a little bit about how we need to start reinvesting because investing in those commercial and real estate will also help the values to go up and will help us. And then there's a limited dedicated investment in infrastructure. Right now we work with surplus. We deal with our bond. We don't have a lot of bond money, but we're not looking at our internal infrastructure, with our streets, our water line, our buildings. And we realize that we've got to focus on making sure that we have a dedicated resource for that. And everyone's going to talk some more about that as we go. When I look at the organization and sit down with staff and we talked about kind of my fiscal and operation observations, one thing that I noticed first and foremost is that revenue projections. We tend to do very conservative revenue with large utilization of revisions throughout the process. So in most cities, you give your best and final offer. What we try to do is we stay extremely conservative, and each month we go up and up and up. But the problem is you have to budget your expenditures accordingly. So you don't focus on some of the things that we need to do based on that. The next one is expenditures. There also has been a major focus throughout the year of reducing expenditures. And so once you establish and vote on a budget, you say we're going to put $300,000 in an area, we start to dwindle away at that $300,000. We come to staff and say, what is it do you not have to spend? And what we're not doing is saying, well, if you don't spend this, you had other things you needed to do, you can do other things with the fund. We spend a lot of time moving that money to the next level, which is our fund balance. We've been building the fund balance, and it's been a key focus of our financial team. It's been very successful. The previous city manager pushed for 75 days, 15 days above the council-approved 60 days. If you look at our financial reports, there are times where we're reporting a 120-day fund balance. And what we are starting to examine is these fund balances are in some cases even higher than we're looking at. And as we're starting to look in our system, for example, most recently even the utility fund, we're discovering that we have truly high fund balance, but we have projects that need to be done, and we've got to make sure that we're focusing on those. We still want to look at that, though. Legislative advocacy. We need to focus on. There are a lot of things that happen at the state, the county, and all the levels of government that we've got to focus on because we usually just let stuff happen or we'll speak on it. So, for example, there was legislation most recently we'll talk about, which was the defunding police legislation. What that legislation would have done is it would have earmarked that every police level would stay at the same. No matter what happened without an election of the people, you couldn't change it. And so some of these things I want to put more focus on. Financial policies. They need to be reviewed and updated annually as part of the budget process to ensure greater safeguards as well as consistency with GFOA. One of the things that we want to present to you is to review our current policies, our financial policies, and also do some updates. But we should bring them back with you as part of your budget process, which is a practice in many of our cities across the Metroplex. Operations. We have an extremely lean staff with limited continuity of operations established. What does that mean to me is, in some cases, we are a one-man shop, and she's here, so I'll use our procurement person. She has been with us, she's there. But if she's not there, we don't have a true backup to keep things going. And so that lean operation is good, but it does not necessarily prepare us for the future if something happens. And then bond usage. We've been limited usage resulting in an overdependency on pay-as-you-go. There are some cities who have a policy that they are cash-based only. What I've discovered is that we have our debt ratio keeps going down, and so we've got to make a decision on where are we going to go with our future investments. And these are just some preliminary observations.
Question?
Yes.
Going back to your first bullet, you mentioned making revisions of the budget as we go through the fiscal year. I stated this when I first became mayor and got an answer, but we have you and we have the new interim finance director, so I'd like to hear your opinions. The comment was, my background and experience is, once the budget is formulated and it's set in stone, things don't change. In other words, if we exceed a budget or we're shortfall here and there, the budget remains in concrete, but there's a column that shows above or below what the budget is. I was told and informed that under municipal accounting practices, revising the budget was permitted, which is contrary to my experience. It's not that it's illegal, it's just that where I come from, a budget is a budget, it stays in the budget. How you respond to that budget in terms of actuals, those show up as either in the hole or not. So is it still your policy and the interim finance director's policy that the budget is still going to be modified as we go, like you said right there? Or is the way my experience stands, is that the way it is?
So your charter specifically outlines a budget. The word should have been an amendment. That is when you change the budget. A revision is nothing in stone, it's nothing in law. In your budget you have yes. So the answer to you is, your budget should be, and an amendment is a formal process that should go through the city council. I do believe that in most cases, cities will do, especially when you have hardship, a mid-year amendment. And then at the end of the year, you can do an amendment or you don't have to. But the word revision, there's no formal action, so it's just giving you an updated projection versus a revision. And I'll ask Ms. Adina to speak to that based on her 30 years of experience. Not aging you. You started at 10.
Oh my God.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And every city is different. And when you look at the charter kind of dictates how you move through your budget and amend or adjust it. This city has in their charter, there's a statement that calls for emergencies as a basis for amendments, okay? But it also allows the city manager to make adjustments in the appropriations throughout the year as they see things need to change, as long as it doesn't go over the total budget. So that's what I see in the charter. You know, every city is different. Every city I know of, if there is a change in something on a line item or a line item that's major, they come back to council, and if council approves it, then it comes through as an amendment. You can do that amendment. Some cities do it quarterly, some do it mid-year, some do it at the end of the year. But it's all kind of, you have to go back to your charter and look at the charter and see how it has been stipulated, how you do your budget.
So you agree that our city charter is in consonance with GFOA? And allowing those revisions and amendments and changes, which, as I said, it's just because of where I come from.
Yeah,
It's not
GFOA
because what's
allows
right or
you.
wrong, it's just where I come from, you don't mess with the budget, it stays there for 12 months.
And basically in government, you don't mess with the budget other than if it's approved in accordance with your charter.
And our charter permits that, and it's
Charter.
consonant to GFOA standards.
But yes, you all are not doing it. Mr. Harvey may be able to.
Just from my experience, the process for me has been that staff via the city manager recommends the budget. Once it comes to us and we adopt the budget, it is our budget. And so we are the only ones that can change our budget. And of course, we do it based on staff's recommendations, based upon their knowledge of facts on the ground.
Sure. Yeah.
But just the arbitrary revision of budget numbers, I would not label that as best practices. The budget, in my opinion, can be changed, but it must be changed from input from the public through us as public representatives.
Very good, thank you.
Which gets back to why I talk about the need for the policies. We've got to spell that out in the policies. I believe, and where I've been, for example, by law, if it was based on a percentage, if you increase your appropriation amount and you're getting more money in, then you have to come back with an amendment. And so part of the safeguards that I wanted to include council in is the word revision was used to just show what the new projections are. I want to do a formal process if it's a change. Otherwise, we're just giving you projection updates. It is not a budget revision. Now, so that's something we're going to work on with budget policies and bring that back to you.
Okay.
So you are correct. Once you voted on a process, I should not be changing the document that you have adopted without going back to the people who adopted it.
One other question, I'm not sure if you want us to stop as you're along the
Oh,
way,
please,
let
no.
me finish. So on the bond uses, limited uses resulting in over dependency as pay as you go. Talk a little bit more about that, because I know that has been our philosophy is pay as you go, and it sounds like you're saying we're being over dependency on that. So explain it more.
Well, this, I believe we were just talking about it today, and we did a bond issuance, and Jennifer, who's been here, can speak a little bit to it. Our bond issuance was the 20 years, which you told me today.
Mhm.
This is the first bond issuance in 20 years, and how we got there.
Pretty much.
Yeah, you said.
So, I mean, in 2017, 2018, you know, when we were going through the process, we had not issued, that was when the last payment pretty much fell off from the previous issuance of GO bond money. So we've always been a pay-as-you-go kind of philosophy, so.
So what happens is, when we look at our street projects, we issue bonds for about 6.6 million in streets. Well, that's going really quickly. And so as we start to get capacity, so for example, I'll use my life in Glen Heights is, my financial advisors would come to me and say, you've got more debt capacity and you may want to issue more debt, because what you don't want to do is let it get to a certain point. And so one of the things that the financial advisor will tell you is, for example, you can issue equipment bonds. so that you can keep your cash for emergencies, but then pay it off with the money that you're saving. So there are different types of issuance that we can do. Right now, we do a lot of projects with our one-time fund balance, but we're starting to slowly deplete that fund balance. And if you look at our budgets as we get through the future years, we're gonna find that we're gonna run out of one-time funds unless we have a major cash event, specifically in our utility area, based on the numbers that we have. But we still have projects that still need to continue to occur. So it's not necessarily saying that we should be an issue of debt. I've seen cities, I believe the city of Tyler and Nacogdoches are a zero debt city. They have a policy that they're going to keep putting money in the bank and just pay it as you go when you get the money. It's a philosophy. We need to decide where we want to be and where's our middle ground for this so that we can set. But it's a fiscal policy that I would like for us to start to think about. I'm not advocating one way or the other, but right now that is how we do most of our projects.
But it sounds like you are advocating one way or the other, because you say that we have an overdependence on pay-as-you-go, which, I don't know how Mark feels, but he comes from the banker side, I come from the number side, and the least amount of debt you have, the better off you are. So are you saying that somewhere in the back of your brain, you're gonna be liking more debt to incur more debt
I've
for
talked
the
to at
city?
least 3 financial people who said that we are very, and you had the number, didn't you, Dina? Go ahead and give it to her. She has that actual fact.
Well, you're very,
Why don't you stand up, please, so we can.
I'm sorry,
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
That's okay.
No, what I said is I've been in a lot of cities, and some with a lot of debt and some with less debt. But debt should be used as a balance, it's everything in moderation. And so pay as you go in debt. When cities don't use debt, then it puts the full weight of paying for that infrastructure on the people that are here right now, and not kind of spreading some of that cost down to the people who are coming along in the city. And so that's some of the philosophy that financial advisors advise us of when we're looking at your debt structure. So I always look at your debt structure and say, okay, how can I keep my debt capacity at a balance and my pay-as-you-go at a balance with not having too much dependency on one or the other. That's the same way when you look at your credit and you're buying, you don't want to have too much debt, but if you don't have any debt, what kind of credit rating are you gonna get?
That's right.
Okay, so what we need to do is just find the balance as a city so we can keep our infrastructure up to date, so we can keep the city moving along without incurring any unanticipated expense due to our inability to update our infrastructure.
We're recognizing as well the financial stability of our city permitted us, when we went out with bonds, we were originally going to go with $20 million, but because we were so financially stable, our bond rating allowed us to go to 21.6 without incurring any greater taxpayer contribution to that.
Yes.
So your financial stability contributes to your rating as well as in terms of what you manage your debt.
Right.
So, there's that balance. And so,
always a balance,
working around
yes.
this table, there's probably separate different opinions on how much debt this city should have. I'm a very conservative one. And how we all sit around the table in terms of if we have infrastructure issues and I know like the city of Lancaster had major problems with their streets, and they issued a bond strictly to take care of streets. Because that's how bad their streets were. And I know when we end up going to that infrastructure and streets, that we have a program that we're like $3 million short of what we, in a 15, 20-year program, the number of dollars we require to actually take care of all of our streets is far beyond our ability to do that as a pay-as-you-go. I think so, we're gonna have to face that when it comes to infrastructure in terms of whether it's this year or next, I really don't know. But I know Patrick, you brought that up in one of our meetings in terms of how do we take care of our streets? How long is it gonna take care of our streets? Those that are in desperate need of repair and those who are in need of maintenance. And Greg went over those numbers for us, so that's something for us to consider in terms of, do we incur debt with a GO simply to make sure that we can do it and do it faster than what the program requires? And I'm just commenting.
Well, no, and what you're saying is right. We've got to agree. So what I want us to do is figure out how far we want to go. I don't want to go deep in debt, but I want to make sure we figure out what is our balance as we start to talk about our policies. What is our policy on debt issuance, as well as when we talk about streets and the rising costs. one of the big things that happened with a lot of the debt that I had during COVID, interest rates were so low, we were able to refinance a lot of our bonds and save money. And so what we just need to decide on is what things that we really need to do. As we're looking at the cost of construction and things right now, it's at an all-time high. What's happening with us with our fire station is we had to get through a process, but the longer you wait on these projects, the higher the cost. And so it may be in our advantage to issue it, but short term, so that we can pay it off quickly, but so that we can get things going and secure prices. But I believe that's a decision that we need to start to focus on and talk about. So
Well, anecdotally, you mentioned up rising construction costs. If y'all aren't aware, I was talking to a friend of mine this past week. He wanted to build a new house. The bill for lumber alone on that new house was $20,000 4 months ago. Today, to execute it, it's $150,000. That's what's happening to the cost of materials out there, and we're facing that with what we're looking at.
And we're gonna hear that
It's very, very serious.
a lot more as we get to our capital projects conversation, yes. Next thing, so I know that we've had work plans and I've been trying to figure out how to sum up what staff's doing. So I gave them some broad categories to start thinking about and talking about. And as I look at our organization, I came up with operational administrative services. What are the things we do? Operation that are internal. Administrative support would be our internal infrastructure, procurement, things like that, human resources. Budget and fiscal management. Where are the changes or what are the budgetary items that fall into that? Economic development and revitalization. That's where we're doing our emphasis on not only bringing in business, but how do we look at revitalization. Our neighborhood services, which is really our code enforcement. And these are the things I've heard you talk to me about. Customer service and community engagement. How do we, and you're going to hear this as a priority for me, as customer service, but also how do we start to engage more with our citizens? Public safety, not just talking about police and fire, but police and fire, security cameras in our parks, some of our street things that we need to do that create a safe environment. And so for the lack of needing something to create our priorities and categories, these are just some high-level global conversation pieces that I've come up with as we start with our staff retreat and going to that next level of discussions. Initial, you didn't update it. It's okay. So give me just a second. The initial information as far as budget objectives. When we talk about budget objectives, one of the things that was very important to me with budget objectives is one is attract and retain high quality talent. We have a problem with not only staff turnover, but we also have a problem with bringing in people. We have several vacancies in areas. When we talk about it, the most important thing that came out of today is fire and police talked about how much it costs for recruitment of one person, and it's about $100,000 from the testing to all the things. And so when we lose someone, we don't just lose a person. The cost of recruiting is very high. The second one is invest in public safety, as I mentioned. That's where we talk about police, fire, and security. Completion of our bond and capital projects. Many of you talked to me about that's a priority. How do we get to that area and how do we move beyond it? And how do we make sure that we're doing it in a timely and a cost-effective manner? Stabilization of programs. Those programs that we're trying to get back on board, our library programs, our recreation programs, our senior programs, those programs that are out there that are important to our citizens. Neighborhood revitalization and cleanup is our neighborhood services, and you're going to hear me talking about creating a new form of code that's going to focus on intensified but more of a community-focused neighborhood services program. Customer service, that is not only a program but staff. Biggest thing I hear from everyone is we don't answer phones. And people have a hard time getting information. And so we have a space in the middle of our atrium that if you go to the city of DeSoto or you go to Cedar Hill, there is somebody there to greet you to tell you where you go. People come in there and they go from door to door trying to figure out where to go. And so part of the priorities that I've looked in the budget is to have someone who's actually there that's answering the phones and giving information to people. And then aligning our planning and economic development, that is really our development opportunities and how that goes together. What I need from council as a way of understanding what are the priorities for council, as we start to make those next line decisions, I know that each of you have things that you want to see included beyond the baseline budget, and that's the information that I will be asking for more feedback from you on. And so I don't know if there's feedback now, or if you want to make sure at the end of this you send me information that's a priority for you. That would be very helpful for me. Next thing is organization. As we look at it, when I got here, we were structured pretty much myself, Chief Brown, or Robert Brown, Mr. Brown, as some of us are trying to get used to, has oversight over police, fire, library, and recreation. Then we have our economic development, and under administration, which are direct, all of these are direct reports to me. We have IT, HR, finance, public information officer. Kristen Downs, as I know it's misspelled, city secretary, and Greg Ramey as our public works director. As I've looked at this budget, one of the priorities that I have is a slight realignment of it. And what I'm looking at is looking at how we're really structured. So currently, beyond the city manager, you have 3 individuals that are pretty singular. You have your city secretary. With the finance change, Jennifer has become a direct report to me as our budget administrator, and we'll talk more about that breakdown. And then Alex as our public information officer. Here we have Chief Brown, who has the same departments, but we also have moved the city marshal, which is a public safety type function underneath the chief. The other thing that we are looking at moving is we're moving our code, which we're calling now neighborhood services, formerly out of utilities or public works, and moving that under the assistant city manager as an office under this. Browns are departments. These are just offices or functions that fall under it. IT is the same. When we get to the financial services, I call it the fiscal services because some of these are large clusters of departments together. There's still accounting, utility billing, municipal court, and procurement. When you look at Mr. Ramey has a lot under his plate and under his belt. He has utilities, water and wastewater, building official, which is permits and inspections, streets, traffic, equipment, and engineering. And that's why you hear a lot of stuff happen. When we look at Mr. Garcia, one of the things that we're looking at is aligning economic development with planning, but also something that he has a specialty in that I want to work on is what I call legislative advocacy. Most of the cities, I've been the assistant to the city manager, I've been over our legislative affairs office, and what I'd like to start doing is coming up with our policy statements annually of what we're looking for. If we don't ask, we don't get. We've got to work on identifying resources and revenues from outside, and so what we would like to do is I'd like to see us having a legislative agenda, someone internally who's tracking, who's helping us to get out, meet and greet, and work with our elected officials from the federal, state, and the county levels. And so that was the other area there. And so what this gives me is kind of a flow of where we are, but also trying to figure out how do we realign it and spread out some of the functions because some of them are very, very heavy.
2 questions.
Please.
First, rationale for moving code under assistant city manager. Secondly, is planning, does that mean that Mr. Thibodeau is going to be reporting to Mr. Garcia?
Yes, and the rationale behind moving code. Code has been a big, when I've talked to councils in my one-on-one, has been the one thing that everybody has highlighted as a challenge. We are becoming very heavy on focusing. So on a daily basis, I receive at least 5 to 6 requests, and Mr. Brown has been facilitating those. And so one of mine is more focused on that area. The word code, when you talk to citizens, is almost a bad word. And so I want to change it and talk about our neighborhood services, but I want to enhance it. I want to create some service levels, some expectations. In fact, today we talked about how we track those requests that are coming in. And it gives me a little bit better coordination by having that office under Chief Brown. In some cases, code is actually a function under the police department. And I wasn't quite ready to do that because I know how heavy most of my requests are in this area, and I want to have someone who's focused on it on a day-to-day basis. And he will be looking at the operations as an office and trying to figure out, there won't be a director of neighborhood services, it's just an office that will report directly to Chief Brown. Okay. Now, the most important part is all of us, we're responsible for working together. So whether you're in this section or that section, there is a correlation between each of those, whether it's permits, and planning and economic development, all of these as one team we work together. Process. So here we are. This one.
All right, I'm going to walk you through the budget calendar and the planning process. As you know, the budget cycle is very much a cycle. It's a repetitive pattern. We start thinking and planning, after we've adopted the budget, we're already starting moving on into the next year. We're thinking of the strategic priorities and setting our work plan, and that's happening pretty much right after we adopt the budget. We start having our departmental budget meetings March through May. We have this meeting so you can see where we're at preliminarily. And then we give it to you guys. We file it by July 30th and 31st, and then it goes into your hands. And then August, September, we have those council meetings and public hearings, and you formally adopt the budget. So it is a continuous circle. It's a cycle. These dates are important to mention. We will get the certified tax rolls from DCAD on July 27th, so we'll be able to finalize our numbers before we submit the budget for filing. We'll file it by July 30th, since that is a Friday. August 6th, we'll receive the tax rate calculations from the county. Tentatively, August 19th, we'll have another budget workshop with the council here. At this council, it's important to note that there will be a record vote needed of the proposed tax rate. So we know, setting the public hearings and putting all that stuff out in the paper and the website and all of that. And then we have the public hearing on the budget and the vote on the tax rate, and September 21st. Put your seal of approval on it. So that is the calendar. So.
Go ahead. So has any thought been given to what we think the tax rate will be?
We have a whole section in there on it. Yes, we do.
I figured that, okay.
And we're gonna talk through it based on preliminaries. I know one of the things that happened last year is that although we received a certified tax roll, there was a calculation issue in calculating the tax rate. And that was part of the challenges that we had in the final adoption of the budget. And so I think we're in a better world. We were in shutdown and there were a lot of things happening at DCAD. And so we're pretty confident that they're on track right now. And so we will see, but I think we're not looking at, as we've always said, we're not looking at any major increase, but we're waiting to see, and we're strategically hoping, and she's gonna talk you through actually every bit of that part.
Because I mean, the whole thing about where we think the tax rate should be then triggers subsequent meetings and all that good stuff. But anyway, that's
the quick answer is we are not projecting a large increase. Right now, we're at about a 2% is our best case scenario in revenue increase, so.
All right.
Okay, so,
I have a question.
yes, please.
A former administration once mentioned that staff needed additional timing to start this process. Are you familiar with that, or have you heard that?
Yes, sir. With the legislation passed last year with the SB2, there is a process that is in motion. If we were to adopt a tax rate that is above the voter approval rate, so that's when we have to take it to the citizens. There's a whole different calendar which you have to follow. But if we just stay below the voter approval rate and say we're above that, we're not getting any new revenue, right? Then it's just one public hearing, and then you have a calendar of events in terms of getting the word out and that sort of thing, but you're not having to take it to the citizens from an actual vote. So if that makes sense. It's a whole different calendar if you take the voter approval rate.
It is, but I thought I was hearing, I think this was Kevin that mentioned this before, that he was trying to move, if we could move the process up a couple of months, that would give him more time to work on the budget. So
I think moving it up or back. If you move it up, you really taking a grab at you won't have enough data to give it. Do you?
What I remember, just because I'm trying to go back in time from when Kevin was here, I think what his thing was when if you were ever to relook the charter, is move that 30 July out into August to give him more time.
The opposite direction.
And move that out because, as you see from Jennifer's, there's a lot of things that are hitting that we don't control in terms of certified tax rolls, the county stuff, and so he wanted to move. What he was saying was move that suspense that we have, the 30 July suspense, to the right to give us some more time between when all this data starts So we don't have just 3 days from certified tax roll to budget submission. We've
There's a
gotten
lot
some
of guessing
breathing.
going on.
And exactly, and so.
So that's what I was wondering what your feel was when I was looking through my mind with that.
I think right now, the biggest issue is the DCAD number. The uncertainty that we had last year is very high. I think generally the projections have been pretty good overall, and I'll ask Ms. Adina her experience. When I was in Glen Heights, we were pretty much on tap by the time we got our certified. So the only number that we had to plug in was that. And knowing what the economy is very important, and knowing what's ahead of us. More time, I think, I'll ask Ms. Adina, other than just the change in staffing, I think we're going to be pretty well prepared, and we will be conservative enough that we won't overestimate what that final number is going to be. And so even now, we have preliminary rolls right now. It's just what is that certified? And so we are trending looking at it. So as far as moving it back, I absolutely think that we need to start the discussion, but we also have to have the ability in here to come back and make some changes once we get more data to that final budget versus going with it as it is until you approve it. With that, Ms.
Yeah, I agree. I think that most time the budgets, and I remember in this area, we handle most of the workshops after that July 27th date, and so it's into August, so it'll be closer around the time that we get the public hearings and the voters and the public hearing, as well as the vote, starting the vote for the tax rate in the public hearings.
But we proactively do everything we can to avoid that vote.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I know that some cities during COVID were given the opportunity to do a higher rate, and I think Lancaster is the only one who was bold enough to do that. But at this point in time, I think we're not anywhere there. As long as we can operate within the means that we have, I think we're going to be fine. We just have to make sure that when we look at our revenues, that we're truly taking a true look at where they are and projecting them as close as possible. I'm not being aggressive, but as close to accuracy as you're going to see when we start to talk about the audited, where you see the disparity between what we projected and where we are, and there's such a gap. There are things we could have done. If you have an extra $1 million, there are programs that each of these folks sitting around here and that even you probably wanted implemented that we never touched because we didn't realize we were going to have this much money. We should never not recognize at least the majority of it. There is some era of something happening that's unusual where money coming in, but our projection should be as close to realistic as possible.
Okay, so I like close, but I also like kind of more the middle portion of that. Maybe that's the conservative piece of me. It's almost like I'll use it for personal. Some people like to get a tax return. Some said, no, let me just pay all into it and just come out even at the end of the year. So I'm thinking when you talk about that, I'm really leaning on the side of
It depends
more
on what
the
you,
middle.
and let's look at the numbers and then I'll ask
Okay.
you if this sounds close.
All right.
Thank you all. Okay, so this presentation going through the numbers is going to look a little different than those that have been on the council before and how we have presented the information. I'm going to walk you through the past budget performance first, and this is the audited numbers. These are what they are. This is how we ended 1920 fiscal year. And I'll just be walking through a very high level, not really getting into the weeds of it, but a real high level. This is how we ended the year. So starting with general fund, taking all consideration of all our different revenue types, we ended the year 1.1 million over the adopted revised number. And what contributed to this overage, our sales tax, we had originally projected them.
A little too fast.
Oh, sorry.
Just a little too fast.
Okay. So I'm not going to walk through every single line item here for the purpose of the actuals. We'll definitely dive in a lot more detail when we get to the revenue outlook, because I'll explain what all goes into that and how we figured this. But just for the purpose of setting the stage on how we got here, getting into the end of year projections, as well as setting the stage going into FY22.
Okay.
So, again, we are 1.1 million over. That's the variance of total revenue for the general fund. Some key things that contributed to the variance, our sales tax performed much better than we had originally projected at this time last year. Going into COVID, didn't know what was going to happen, and seeing the trend coming down, we had revise that number down. The transfers, that's the things coming in from other funds, from utility fund, from those other funds. That major difference is that CARES Act funding that we received, the $425,000. Permits and fees, we were over in that area. We had an increase in building and health inspection fees, talking with Ramey and his folks. We do have some commercial buildings and everything, but during the COVID, we see a lot of opportunistic builds and things like that, and I think we have a higher base in which to assess those fees moving forward. Fines, those are your court fines. Those, obviously, during COVID, we weren't issuing citations as much, so those fines were down. Investments, as we all know, that investments, the interest rates have pretty much plummeted in the last year. We moved a lot of money over into CDs, and that's had a better return. Recreational fees, obviously we had a decline in the memberships and the facility rentals during COVID when the buildings were closed. And then we have another revenue category. We saw some increases in the site towers, the cellular site towers, as well as we received an unexpected, it's called the special inventory tax overpayment from the county. So it was a large anomaly. So expense-wise, same story here. Going through all the departments, that variance is, we had a decrease in expenses of $1.4 million over the adopted revised number. And this is just operational expenses. The contributing factors to there, the big one is the salary and benefit savings, just a variety of factors, vacancies, insurance election changes, some overtime reduction, things like that. We had, firefighters responding to pandemic, and we had funds going to the emergency pandemic fund. So we canceled travel and training. They were canceled because of COVID or going virtual, things like that. Our election expenses, we had a May election that was deferred into the fall, so there were savings there. Utility expenses overall, water, electricity, gas usage, things like that. We weren't here, the buildings weren't open. Clothing, that's tied to the savings and the vacancies. Contractual services. When it comes to things like in public works, of course, our projects, sometimes the timing is not perfect. It rolls over into the next year, so we will see some difference in the projects. Fuel, gas, what we paid per gallon was less than what we had projected. Street materials, we weren't buying as much concrete. In the fire department, we spent less on the drugs. Going into transfers, that is the...
Sorry, Jim, before you go there.
Yes, sir.
So, really quick, and I know you may get to this a little bit more later. So when you talk about savings, was it really savings or was it really reallocation to somewhere else?
No, it is a net effect of savings from not having the vacancies, not having, the part-time hours, things like that. It's not
Cost avoidance.
So let me give you an example.
Okay.
Talk about the election for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So we say we had a May election, we deferred to the fall, but at the in the fall, the election cost was higher.
Yes, and you'll see that when I talk about the projection, the end-of-year projections, that we increased the cost there because it's higher.
But that's my point. It's not. So that's
I guess not really
savings.
savings, but more of a deferred. But
Yes.
this is what went into the high-level things that went into the variance.
Okay.
If
All
you
right.
will.
Thank you.
Okay. The transfers, that is an expense after the operations. I'm not going to go into all the detail here, but the net effect there is that was reduced by $738,000, and primarily it had to do with the dissolution of the medical insurance fund. That was actually absorbed in the cost centers and not showed here as a transfer out. So at the end of the day, the impact of total revenue over expenses to the general fund was a $1.6 million increase to the fund balance. Okay? Going into utility fund. Okay, the three major categories there are water, sewer, and other revenues. At the end of the day, at the end of the year, the variance there was a $318,000 decrease in what we had revised for the adopted revised. And that primarily is contributed to, from March through July, we weren't doing cutoffs. We weren't collecting aggressively on delinquency. So this, can contribute to the variance there. On the expenditure side, primarily those, same thing kind of the general fund, we have staffing shortages in water and wastewater, the vacancies, and that sort of thing is what you see there. The debt, at the end of the day, $812,000 decrease in total expenditures. Yeah, so again, vacancies, contractual, we're still on Banner right now, UB, the Munis implementation rolled over, didn't complete all of it in FY20. Materials, that's correlated with vacancies, and then electricity, again, the usage went down. So at the end of the day, our total expenses over revenues, that impact was 1 million decrease to the fund balance. Solid waste fund. Again, the solid waste fund here, we only had a variance of 22,000 less. Those are garbage collection fees. In terms of the expenses, we had a drop of 216,000 in operational expense, and that's primarily just the collection, the garbage collection and landfill expenses were less. We do have transfers coming out of this fund. That's for alley replacement as well as transfer into the general fund. And at the end of the day, the total fund expense there was down 230,000. So that net effect to the solid waste fund revenues over total expenses increased the total fund balance by 184,000. The drainage fund, this is the stormwater fees. We collect these through the utility bill. The variance there, total revenue, was 33,000 more than what we projected. For the expense side, the drainage administration, that is from, we have some vacancies on the drainage crew as well. And then just the CIP erosion control, since that's project-based, sometimes just the timing of expenses going out the door, paying for CIP projects. But at the end of the day there, the total operational expense was reduced by 262,000. So revenues over expenses, net effect there is 22,000 increase to the fund balance of stormwater. The Fieldhouse. Obviously, during the pandemic, the Fieldhouse had to close its doors to the tournaments and to after-school programs and to the summer camp that always been pretty popular. So the revenues at the end of the day was 57,000 less than what we had originally projected, or revised, I should say. And on the expense side, did reduce spending by 113,000 with a net of 122,000. For total expenses again, and I know it was shut down. We weren't having the revenue coming in for the tournaments and things, but we still had to keep the building up to date. We still had to run the building. We still had to have people there to clean, to answer phones, to do the business, even though we were not doing the tournament. So that explains why we still had some operation costs. At the end of the day, though, the total expense over revenue came to 311,000. Impact to the fund. The economic development, that's one of our special revenue funds, which I'll get into more detail what that means. Again, this is all its revenue comes from sales tax. So again, sales tax did better than we projected. So the total impact to the revenues was 115,000 more. For the expense side, for administration, for the programs consist of like beautification, which was, we didn't spend as much in that program because we didn't have the seasonal staff. Things like that, one-time projects and transfer. The net effect there of total fund expense was reduced by 294,000. So at the end of the day, the total revenues over total expense, it increased the fund balance by 723,000. And lastly here, hotel motel. This is what we received from the hotel occupancy tax. Our revenues came in better than what we had projected. Again, going into COVID, we didn't know how many people would be staying in our hotels and how that would impact the taxes. So we did do actually better than we had revised. On the expense side, we did have definitely some savings in the administration. We had some expenses that we had budgeted for but did not happen, such as that major event planner, some of the travel and the training and the wayfinding sites and advertising and things like that. So the total expense was down by 180,000. So at the end of the year, revenues over expenses, the net impact of 337,000, an increase to the fund balance. So that is where we ended up.
So I'm sorry, so we put the 337 back to the fund balance.
Right, that increased the fund balance by 337,000. That's the net effect of revenues over expenses.
It's just funds that are still available to be reinvested in other projects. So it's just the the funding that's available for other projects. So in those funds, there's still back there in the hotel motel that can be placed into other projects. So we're calling it a fund balance because it's above, it's extra fund money in the bank for that for hotel motel, hot funds.
Yes, Mr. Kinters.
So all things considered for this period we just discussed, we weathered COVID pretty well.
Yes.
Yes, we did.
With the exception of the utility fund.
Yes.
She also mentioned one of the things that we had discovered, and a lot of cities discovered, is federal mandates and people, they mandated that you couldn't cut water off. But if you imagine everyone was home all day, they were using more water. They were showering, kids were home from school, flushing, things like that. So there was more usage, but then there was somehow less revenue coming in because people were allowed not to pay during that time. I can tell you, just using an example of my past city, we did an estimate during that time, and it was about 1.4 million in revenue lost just because of non-payment. And where you all were able to start back in July, state mandate has not at this point in time allowed Petersburg to start back cutting water off for a year later. So it is, I don't believe our collection is, we're working on it, we're working on catching up, and one of the things is our folks do pay their water bills, but during that time there was, and some of them were delayed in catching up to the next year, and that may come back into an accounting issue, but we are, one of the things that Ms. Atmore is doing is a deep dive into our utility fund to better understand what we have, what's available, and what things we can do, and we'll have that discussion in more in depth with her assessment. But this is your audited. So when you received your audit, this is just another way of showing you everything that was included in the audit.
All right, so moving forward to the end of your projections. I'm not going to call it revised, I'm going to call it a projection. So this is how we project to end this fiscal year, okay? I'm going to go through the same kind of format there with the flow. So general fund, all the revenues. The difference over our original adopted budget will be 1 million increase of revenues. That primary factor is going to be the sales tax. Again, the sales tax has performed much better than we anticipated. Right now we are experiencing a higher sales tax. We have stimulus money. You know, people are spending. COVID restrictions have been released, so people are out there actually spending money in our economy, which is a good thing. So again, sales tax. What I just said. Permits and fees, what's not in the original adopted budget, we are projected to get an $135,000 payment for that ambulance supplemental program. We didn't know if that was still going to continue or if we could expect the funding, but according to Mr. Ryan and the fire department, we will be getting a payment. So that is our estimate of that payment. Our ambulance fee collections have gone up. As we had brought to you the previous councils about EmergerCon, that's going to go live in July, mid-July, and they project about an 18% increase in collections. We'll see if they can live up to that, but we are seeing higher collection rate on ambulance fees. And then again, permit fees. We have 3 large commercial constructions happening right now, so that has contributed to the increase in the building permits. In the other revenue category, we receive reimbursements from some other cities for our regional emergency manager. She's out of the fire department. We had a gap in a time of had a vacancy, and so that reimbursement is down because we had a vacancy. Court fines, again, they're remaining low, but they are starting to increase as we're getting more out there issuing more citations. On the investment side, again, that's just interest rates are low, so we had to revise that number. Recreational fees, we went into the budget assuming we'd be back at pre-COVID levels, but that just did not happen. So we are revising that, projecting that down to, but we are, memberships, rentals, facility rentals, those are picking up.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I guess it's probably directed a little bit more at the chief. In terms of ambulance transport revenues, are we looking at it doing better in terms of the number of ambulance funds or the work of the new collection fund?
According to Mr. Ryan, our EMS Division Chief, he says that this new company that we are going to, we've contracted with, Emergicon, they're a lot more aggressive on collecting these ambulance fees, and they have a better pay schedule, I guess is the best way to put it, for collecting these fees. So we have a lot of confidence that they can do good based on some of our surrounding cities that use the exact same company that they saw, marginal increases to quite a bit of increase. So we're being conservative on the amount that we think that we'll collect, and if we do better, we do better. So I think that Emergicon will do the fire department good on their EMS collections.
And wasn't the agreement with Methodist Hospital Systems where they basically admitted they were shorting us and they were gonna start paying us what they owe us rather than holding it back? I think wasn't that part of the impact for the future
That
as
is
well?
correct, Mayor. He, once we got that agreement in there where they will give us the information that they have provided for our billing services, then they can go in there and provide a lot more information to collect from the private insurance and Medicaid.
Methodist was withholding the information we need to process the bill to the transportee, which did not allow us to make the collections, and there was a crash. The fire department with the entire Methodist health system, so they finally agreed, we will provide you with the data you need to go get your money.
Was it just staff misapplication on their part?
No, it was a high-level policy decision. Well, we're just gonna, as I understand it, there was an interpretation that we don't need to provide, we can't provide this to you
HIPAA?
because it's HIPAA. And it's baloney.
One of the big things
So it
that,
precluded us from getting the social security numbers to process that information to go against the collection and say you owe us $1,000 for moving you from your address to Methodist Charlton.
There's information that we may not be able to obtain in the field if the patient's unconscious, unable to provide that information, didn't have it at the time, and we transport them there, then they're able to get that information. They would not give that to us.
Right.
there are companies out there that
We
are
broke-
actually
we
going out
broke it
doing this. And because there's also, when you get to Medicare and Medicaid type of individuals, that information will also give you authorization for those who are receiving benefits. And so there are some health audits that can be done where you can go back, just like we used to do with utilities, to see if we're missing those funds. And it has to be a partnership. And that's where people are very hands-hold of information because they don't feel. But it was the same as when you started with COVID, where the counties and the health departments didn't feel that they could share the location and the person with COVID, but you would be sending your public safety folks out there, and we had to go back and do some interpretations from a HIPAA standpoint.
Moving to the expenditures for the general fund, the variance in the total there was increasing by 51,000, and I will explain the reasons for the variance. Now, just as a note, this is the total variance up here. These don't necessarily add to this. These are just the high level things I pulled out to show you what is contributed to that total variance. So if you're trying to add it, it's not going to work.
It's not an exhaustive list.
Yes, thank you. The main one of the increase is that electricity charge that we have to pay for the winter storm. That is captured here. We moved the city marshal office underneath the general government umbrella. So you'll see that total cost added here. That election expense you were talking about, our baseline has been about 45,000 is what we've spent in years past, but that has increased per the county without our control on that, about 29,000. We do have a one-time project that we are starting up in this current year for the website upgrade, and that is in process. But we are reducing the retiring medical subsidy. As those that have been on the council will remember that we dissolved the medical insurance fund since we are no longer self-insured. We do not charge retirees their full rate, so the city does subsidize some of their premium. We have less participation on the retiree side, and they are dropping off when they turn 65, so that number has been revised down. So. In the finance, again, the total there is 140,000 less. Again, that's due to the city marshal's office being moved, as well as we did budget a part-time position under the city marshal, but we have never really been able to fill that on a part-time basis, so we just removed that cost out altogether. On the park and recreation side, that primary driver of the 96,000 decrease is again salary and benefits, further reductions of part-time hours. The senior center was closed till June. Special events, we reduced that budget down. We were having in the fall and some in the spring, some of the events were either canceled or we did some kind of drive-through event, so we weren't putting as much expense to putting on special events. On the police side, it's very nominal. It's only $2,000 really, but we had some reduction in overtime hours and clothing costs, things like that. But it was offset by some vacation and sick leave payouts. So the net effect was very small. On the public works side, again, it's pretty nominal, 13,000 decrease there. Again, salary and benefits, vacancies and streets that we have. The fuel cost, it's lower actual costs than what we've estimated in the original budget. Street materials, concrete, things like that, we're not buying as much. And building inspections did go up because we had to use a third-party contractor while we had the building inspector position vacant. So, and fire, overall increase there is 18,000, and that has to do with a vacancy and a termination, particularly payout.
So what's our experience in terms of minimizing turnover among the street crews?
What is our experience in that?
Yeah.
Our experience is that we are not able to minimize turnover in the street crew or the utility.
And maybe I worded that a little bit wrong, but I just wanted to hear what's Duncanville's experience in terms of keeping those positions filled.
How many vacancies do you currently have?
6 in utilities and 4 utilities, 6 in streets, and 2 code officers.
Okay. I ask that because other cities are having that same problem.
And I think to answer that, the trend right now, they can make more in the private sector, doing the construction and things like that. So it's just hard to get them in the door and what they've been turning over.
We're competing. We're also looking long range at possibly talking to advertise. So we're actually going as far as I think we've already putting up signs for workers, because I spoke with the city manager in Glen Heights and I said, well, why don't you have any vacancies? Well, they're relying very heavily on Waxahachie on down 35. So we're trying to figure out how to target, because in the Metroplex, it's too much competition. But we have employees here who drive from Waco every day, or Centerville, Texas. And so we have people who travel, but what we're going to have to do is expand our reach from a recruitment standpoint. So we're working with HR to look creatively. How do we find these scarce resources outside of the DFW area?
On the transfer side, the only change there is what we transferred into the TIF fund. The incremental difference was higher than what was originally projected, so we have to transfer that difference into the TIF fund. So our fund balance for the general fund, where we're ending up at the end of the year, I created this to look a little different and read hopefully a little better for your understanding. Don't want to focus so much on the ending fund balance as the unreserved balance. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the simple math here. So this is our beginning fund balance at the beginning of this year. You take in your revenues, you take out your operational expense, and that gives you a net revenue here. And so we are projecting to end the year at $886,000.
We ended.
Yeah, end of the year in revenues over expenses, and that's operational. Okay.
Can I stop?
Yes.
That's opposed to our budget of ending it at a negative $135,000 deficit.
That's a swing of almost $1 million.
Yes, it is.
So the new fund balance, after you take this and you add your net revenue there, brings you to $12 million. Now, we have the policy in place currently that you have a 75-day fund balance. That is $5.3 million. That's that calculated number. So you take that out of the equation. This is your balance remaining, 7.2 over or below that reserve, okay? You take out your total transfers and one-time projects, the 1.5, This will give you an unreserved balance of 5.6 million. This has no other reservation, no other purpose, nothing is tying that. So. what I
So
want to point out.
unreserved balance means those funds are available for use anywhere you so desire.
You so choose.
desire.
Yes, yes.
And I'm sorry, what was the number of days?
That's at 75
This is
days.
75 here, yes, calculated.
So Jennifer, go back up to that line, 86, 139.
886,
Here?
yeah.
Right
Yes.
there, yeah. What creates that difference?
We're projecting more revenue than what we're spending.
So our revenues are 33 million, our expenditures are 32 million. There's a net of 886,000.
Projection.
Yes.
End of year projection.
Which can give a comfortable feeling, but it's not real. It's understated because of avoidance of things we didn't collect or didn't expend because of COVID.
I agree.
So that's a kind of a book, you don't get comfortable with that $886,000, it's bogus. Because it just means we didn't spend stuff because things were shut down.
I'm hopeful, but I'm not confident.
I know, but I'm looking at all this and I'm waiting to see what we end up with to start to look at 21 and 22, because this is not a valid baseline.
I agree.
The things that they have modified, and it's a great audit in terms of here's the numbers, here's what's happened, we can't use this as a baseline to see what's gonna happen post-COVID.
And something
We're back to real business post-COVID.
And something I do want to highlight, make sure you understand that it is our practice that we budget full staff, even though we know that they're going to have vacancies and turnover. And so when we look at these numbers again, we are projecting it to be closer to where we think we're going to actually end up the year, and that's going to have those vacancies into consideration.
And so if you look at it though, if this is full staff, it was at 32 million. That was not projecting any expenditure changes. And it's still revenue exceeds expenditures. So at full, we budgeted pretty line from an expense standpoint. But our revenues there are anomalies in there. The CARES dollars are great, but we can't, there has to be some other infusions beyond CARES dollars coming in.
That's what I was gonna ask, was CARES dollars in those numbers?
CARES dollar, that impacted our FY20 ending. So it's not reflected per se in the end of your projection, but it did help the fund balance that gets rolled into the beginning.
Stimulus, the stimulus funding that everyone had that they went out and spent. And so when you go to car dealerships, and even though we don't make money from it, and other things, if you go to Best Buy, you can't buy appliances or TVs, they're all on back order. And not just because they're not shipping them, people are buying them as fast as they go in. And so those are some of the things that we're benefiting from. And so we'll talk some more about what other things that may come out that we're going to see shortly, particularly with legislation that's happening and the controller deciding that the sales tax will now come, especially on internet sales, to us. And so we'll talk some more about that.
Sorry, I was thinking you meant the money we got, not sales tax. Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the money we got.
Oh, okay, yes, okay, that was in FY20. So going into the utility fund, we're not projecting a variance there for water and sewer revenues at this time. The only difference there is in the other revenue section, and that's because of interest on the invested income. Okay. On the expense side, the variance increase there on the utility accounting has to do with just the timing of the Munis implementation. We rolled part of it out of FY20 into FY21 to continue that implementation project, as well as continuing on with banner support longer than we had originally projected. Water, wastewater decreases, again, that's related to direct material and relating to offset, relating to staffing. But we also have the 18,000 of that ancillary charge for the electricity that we charge to the utility fund. So at the end of the year, we're projecting $67,000 increase in fund expenses. So the fund balance here is the same scenario of how it flows. We started the year with the fund balance of here, and this is a cash fund balance. Here's our total revenues minus our operational expense, and that gives us a 6.1 million in net revenues over expense. For the debt and the transfers, we're transferring out into the general fund. That is the transfer for operational general fund support, accounting, HR. administrative fee, if you will, also the pilot tax, as well as the $5 million that's going into CIP to fund the CIP projects. So that net change in fund balance is 1.1 in the deficit there.
Wait a minute, so you took the $5 million that's going into there that we really have $3 million on, right?
No, $5 million is going from out of utility fund into the CIP fund to fund our CIP projects.
That's the pay-as-you-go money that we're doing for our capital projects, and utilities.
So the new fund balance comes to 7.3. We have a targeted fund balance of 60 days. That comes to 3.1 million. So that unreserved balance difference is 4.1 million.
So a couple of notes on this one. One of the things that we are going to talk about in fiscal policies, and Ms. Atmore, even in her initial discussions when it comes to utility fund, is the belief that where this is at 60, it should be higher than 60 as a best practice, and that would be a discussion we can have with you as far as building a fund balance in the utility fund. The other thing that she's going through and doing a review that we didn't have enough time to do, if we look at our audit, do you have that with you, Ms. Atmore? The
Yes.
audit information? Did you?
Yes, I do. Yeah, the CAFR. Yes, on the CAFR, your utility fund,
We were told not to use that term anymore.
I've never heard that till I
Comprehensive
got here.
annual financial report.
I'm sorry, yes, CAFR is no longer to be used, you as that is
It's
the
not
new term.
politically correct?
It's not politically correct anymore, so yes, you are correct.
I have to
Okay,
learn
that's the gap update. Okay,
Speaking
so
as
we
the one
cannot
who
use
got
the financial
slapped, I just
report.
wanted to
You
let
got
you know.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
He
Well, I
didn't want
just got
Patrick to
slapped,
get on
okay?
So
So, yeah.
Join the slappy.
Well, you just slapped me, okay, thank you very much. But no, on your financial report that's audited, what has come out is that when I looked at the proprietary fund, if you look at that report, you'll look in, I think it has on page 23, it has the utility fund. In that, you'll see down at the bottom, there's a net position. And then in that net position, there is the net investment in capital assets, which is all the capital assets that the utility fund has built as far as your infrastructure during all the years you've had this fund in place. And then there's the unrestricted. The unrestricted is the amount of fund balance that you have available to you. Okay, and so that's one of the things I was looking at today, just reviewing prior reports on what the fund balance is and what's been reported. But when it really comes down to it, when you look at the financial report and reading these, and we can go through this at some point, and I can kind of walk you through how this is supposed to be read. But that line right there is your fund balance. That's the beginning fund balance for fiscal year 21. That's what you have available to you to spend. And if you have that report, you'll see what's in there, and then you'll see what's here.
What's the number that's in there?
It's 16 million is what you ended the year with in unrestricted fund balance.
Of all funds.
No, just the utility fund. And that's the utility, and they combine in the audit, they combine the utility operating fund and the utility CIP fund, okay?
So why is there, I'm not following, $9
So
million variance between that and the number you just quoted?
Yes, and that's some
We're
things
gonna
that
dig
we're digging for and why that difference is. I think I know kind of why the difference is, and we kind of went over that today, but I want to further give you a little bit more
So that delta is a
information.
work in progress.
Yes.
That delta is a work in progress.
So we've looked in the system and we looked at both this document.
Yes,
It's much
I
more
go to the
progress.
system, you have a financial system that is very robust. And all the data is supposed to be in that system. And I went to the system and I got the same answer as the audited number.
What number?
It was 16 million.
16.
Yeah,
So
16.
I guess that was my question about the auditors. But the auditors have not,
It's in the audit.
Okay.
That's what the audit says.
This is fiscal year 20, because whatever you end the year with for fiscal year, the prior fiscal year in September, that becomes your beginning fund balance for the audit to start off with. Okay, and everything after that, your revenues and expenditures roll in as one, revenues increase, expenditures decrease, and then you get your ending fund balance. And so I always like to go back to the audited numbers, and I always like to go back to your financial system, which is where all your data is supposed to reside. And so I may look at some sheets that have been going on in the entity they're working with, staff is working with, but bottom line, you go back to your financial system and look at what's in there, because that's where all the data is supposed to be recorded.
So we're gonna do a deep dive into all, and that's, I just wanna give you this, because if I come back in 4 weeks at our next meeting, when we have this discussion, and discover that that's correct, because there are spreadsheets that track this here.
Yeah.
But the main source, as we've moved to Munis, has to be our systems. And so in our systems and in our audit, it says something very different than we're presenting. So what I don't want is when I come back to you with this number again and say that it's either the same or it's much larger, that you don't have some understanding of what we're investigating.
Thank you.
Okay, going into the solid waste, projection end of year, we're not projecting any change in the revenue. On the expense side, it's very nominal. So the ending fund expense there is only a decrease of 4,000. So doing the math here, starting the year at 847, with the revenues and the expenses, the net effect there is 133,000. The total transfers out, that goes to the alley fund, that goes to the general fund, is 342. So that net change is a negative 209. We don't have a policy in the solid waste fund on a 60-day, having a 60-day fund balance, but for consistency in these type of funds, I did list it out here just to kind of show what that operational obligation would be, if you will, for the 60 days. So what it comes to is a negative 81,000 in the unreserved. So you wouldn't have, you're eating into the fund balance. This is telling you.
This fund,
Yes.
its primary source of revenue is from,
It's the garbage collection and the landfill fees. It's solely garbage and landfill.
just garbage.
They like the garbage fund?
Solid waste? No. Okay, so drainage, that's the stormwater fees. As you may remember from a couple of years ago, we implemented a new fee structure for the non-residential type properties. And so we are now realizing that full rate change in this fiscal year. So we are projecting a 62,000 increase in the revenues. This other revenue line item, just for educational purposes, is we budget for a 10,000 reimbursement for bag wall programs. That number can vary depending on actual projects that we have and the reimbursement we receive from the citizen. On the expense side, drainage administration, again, that 68,000 comes from just, we are 2 men down in the drainage crew. And the CIP and erosion control, which you'll hear in more greater detail when Ramey does his CIP presentation. We did have an emergency bag wall project we had to roll out the door immediately, so we had a major increase in that projected number. But so that's where you see the change in the operational expense. Yes, sir.
Greg,
Sir,
I know on the stormwater fees that we increased, that was a phased approach to hitting the.
That's correct. We rolled it in
Has it
over a
finished?
year.
Yes.
Have we finished?
Yes, sir. It culminated.
It did?
Yes.
Okay, that's all, okay, thanks.
So here it stacks up at the end of the day. Again, the drainage fund does not have a policy of 60 days, but again, for consistency, I just wanted to show you what that would look like. So we have more expense over our revenues, but again, that is attributed to the CIP bag wall erosion project that we had to do. And so that's where you get the negative 261 in net in expenses.
You keep mentioning that we don't have a policy for the 60 days. At some point, will staff give us a recommendation if we should have a policy at this point?
I know you brought up that question before, I believe, in the past. And I'll have Ms. Atmore really speak to that as a best practice. when it comes to setting fund balance or setting targeted fund balance. And
When it comes to the other funds, like
Yes.
drainage and
Well, on the enterprise type funds, it's always good to set a policy on that, and that's part of GFOA's practice. General funds usually minimum is 60 days. On your utility funds and your drainage, your enterprise type funds, you should think about what's the anticipated risk to this fund if something should happen. So the utility fund is the one that's most important. So 90 days is really the, yes, sir.
No, finish.
Oh, yeah.
90 days is really what?
For the utilities fund, you need a 90-day. Some cities have gone to longer than that, more because when a utility fund gets hit, it can take a hit, just like this winter storm hit. And then having to go back and try to figure out how we're going to cover expenses. So I know in DeSoto we set a reserve of 145 days and we had to build up to that. That didn't come overnight. That was over a period of time. We got a policy in place that said, hey, this is what we're working our way up to. And so we got it to 145 days and kind of kept it at that because we realized we had one event that kind of caused us to like, oh my God. And so that's where on your utility fund, your water, where your revenue is coming in, you need to kind of set that tone so that something happens, you're not having to worry about these unanticipated expenses. And so also on your fiscal policies, when I talk about the other funds, the drainage, really those are kind of where you feel comfortable with, but you should always set some type of reserve balances on those funds in case something comes up. You don't want to ever go in home. Yes, sir.
So, and it is good to have reserve policies in funds. The other side of that coin is that you're also implicitly assuming a responsibility to do something when that reserve balance is not met. So concurrent with reserve balance policy is in case the reserves dip below this, then management will do A, B, C, D, and E to bring the fund back into balance. So, I'm not discouraging.
Okay.
I'm just saying, that's to think through the entirety of the issue. If we're looking at that sort of thing.
No, I like that thought. So you're not saying set it. So you're saying, but if you just have a food for thought to say, if he was to have one, it should look like this.
Yeah.
Versus having one in place completely.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and that is optimum. You set a policy that says if it dips below this, this is how we will bring it back into line. And I do that in your fiscal policies, and you may have to revise that and look at that every year. You should be looking at your fiscal policies every year to determine if they're actually working for the city, they're in line. You want to update something, revise something in order to meet the temperature of the council. Okay.
So moving on, going over the Fieldhouse, where we're ending up with the projections of this year, we're expecting a 60,000 increase in the revenues. We got lots of tournaments happening, and that parking lot is always full, as you see. In operations, we're projecting a 16,000 decrease there, as you can see. In terms of the Fieldhouse, it is what it is, but we are projecting a revenue at the end of the year. So revenues over expenses of 8,000.
So we don't see any. We're not looking for any major project expense wise on the Fieldhouse.
Not for the rest of this fiscal year.
Floors and signage and all of that stuff is. I'm sure we'll get into it more.
Yes, he can certainly.
Aren't you working on the back part?
We are doing some projects. We're working with our economic development department. Here he is. For those projects. So it's not coming out of this fund.
Also, before you leave, one thing I want to point out, because it's important for us to see this, is that we look at the word ending fund balance, and I don't think anyone's ever paid attention as much to this as I did when I first got here just recently, is we're operating at a $1.4 million ending fund balance as a negative, which means basically we've been using general fund revenue to subsidize, that's kind of a loan to this fund that is owed back to the general fund. And the only way this goes back is we start to get to this point being beyond $8,000, or we've got to find another major cash event to pay back the general fund. But I just want everyone to see this, because when I see something that's a deficit that's there, that I just want to make sure that we're constantly highlighting what it is and remembering that this is funding that's owed back to the general fund.
Yeah, I think we're very familiar with that portion of it.
That's an understatement.
Yes.
Jennifer was very wise in skipping over that last, in the prior slide. Yeah, you were very wise in skipping over the pink part down there.
Yeah.
So skip it over again, Jennifer, keep going.
Okay, okay, let's keep going. Economic development, a fund that is doing really well. Okay, again, we talked about sales tax. Sales tax is projected to end very healthy, so that's where you see the variance in the economic development fund in the year projection. On the expense side, really it's nominal in terms of the expenses, not much change. Just to highlight on the one-time project transfer that has to do with the abatement of the I-20 Alexander property. So the total expense there comes to $165,000 increase.
Excuse me, sir.
New name.
New name?
New name.
Okay, thank you. Thank
So
you.
economic development, where we're gonna end up, again, the net over expenses is $770,000 revenue, yes.
Now, I was going to say, and we have a bond that's going to roll off.
Yes, FY21, this is the final year for the debt that the economic development has been paying for DC debt, and that had to do with the Waterview Park mainly, I think, some of the parks. So this is the last year to pay that, so.
It's an increase
yay
of
for-
$538,000 a year.
Yeah.
So I have a use for that.
Do?
Yeah, we're gonna throw a mortgage
Fieldhouse.
note burning party. We paid for it.
Pay for it, all right. Hotel motel, the projection is coming in slightly less on the occupational the hotel taxes that we are receiving, so that $20,000 decrease there. On the administration, the expense side, really it's nominal there. We have grants that we give out every year typically on the applications, like ASO, the Lions Club, the Sandra Meadows Classic, things like that. We didn't have the Sandra Meadows Classic this past year, so that's really where that fluctuation there is.
And just anecdotally, I think we're fortunate as a city, none of our hotels closed during COVID.
Yes, they've been
They
performing
were-
pretty
they-
well.
Yeah, they were tight, they were hurting, they were in deficit mode, but none of them shut the doors.
Yes.
They kept them open.
So the ending, the net revenue there over expenses is 40,000 increase there, so, and healthy fund balance on hotel motel side. Last one, I'm bringing this up, especially for you, Mr. Cooks, as you had asked this question in the town hall budget, talking about the Transportation Improvement and Safety Fund. As you know, a couple years ago, the legislation had banned the red light camera, so we stopped taking in revenue for red light, but I wanted to point out what we plan to do in order to close out the fund this year. We do have some obligations currently coming out of the fund. We're doing a project over there in your neck of the woods there with the crosswalk there, enhancements in front of Hollywood Park. We do have some continued obligations on the watch guard contract for the police body cameras. But what's left in the, what we're projecting to end the year with is $252,000, and that's going to be transferred into the street CIP sidewalk fund, so we can do some of the sidewalk projects that we would normally do if this fund had been operational continuously. So then that'll end up in closing out that fund.
Good.
So that's what we're doing with those funds. So that is it for
Mayor, Council, I'd like to say, less than 2 weeks ago, I went into Jennifer and I said, I want to present things very different. And as a role, I asked her to be a direct report to me and we work on budget. And I gave her a task and said, not only are you gonna help me to present this different, I want you to present this. And I think personally, to show her knowledge and understanding of it and present this, and to me, what I think is a user-friendly way to see, I just want to commend her and thank her for what she's done on the first part, and you're going to see more shortly, so.
So now we have Mr. Garcia. He is going to, do you want to take a break now?
Yeah, just so y'all know, my hope, my desire is that we can put a hard stop on tonight at 9 o'clock. So if we've been in here for an hour and a half, if you want a 5-minute break to do whatever you might have to do, let's take it. If not, we keep going. What do you want to do?
Let's take a break.
Okay, we're ready.
7:40, we are back in session. Thank you very much. Good.
Okay, Gus is gonna talk to us. The reason I asked him to do, a lot of times when we start to talk about the next fiscal year, we've gotta talk about economics, because that's where the money comes. And so in a brief 25-minute presentation, Gus will be talking to us in an enthusiastic way about the things that we have coming and what does our economy look like in the coming fiscal year.
Why don't you put a time on it?
Why does he get 25 minutes?
Randy's got one too.
We'll try well. We're estimating time for questions in there too, I'm sure.
Yes.
And old Baptist church would say, take your time, take your time. That's what we say in the Baptist church.
Gus Garcia, Economic
Hey,
Development.
you know, let's wait. This young lady's first exposure to us. She's gonna go home tonight going, I don't know about this.
It was just like mine.
That was a good one.
Oh.
You walked right in.
You did, you did.
What's your name?
This is your first time.
Presentation.
Sorry, Gus, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Gus Garcia, Director of Economic Development. As Ms. Reed had mentioned, I'll be addressing the council with a couple of things about economic development. And looking at the city of Duncanville and some of the analysis we did to identify what was some of the things that we look at when we're planning for the future strategic planning. Of course, you saw our budget fund balance at the end of this year projected at $4.7 million. So obviously, the economic development has done very well under the leadership of the board and the council over the last few years. We've accumulated quite a bit of wealth. I say wealth, accumulated quite a bit of fund balance, so we're excited about that. That can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. But at the end of the day, we want to look at what are the things we want to do to grow and revitalize the city, and we looked at a couple of different items. One of them was, where are we performing? What are some of the weaknesses? We look at the top employers. What is our diversification? That's very, very important. We also look at employment and unemployment. What are our workers doing? Does our community pay the bills? Where do they buy food? Do they pay taxes? Are they continuing to help keep the city growing? It's very, very important. We also look at our workforce. Are they on Medicare? Are they fixed income? Is it an older generation, older population who are they and what do they do and how do they behave? So we look at the tapestry, the demographics, what is this community doing, what does it look like? The age of our workforce, that's another thing we also look at. We look at educational attainment. There are studies that show that if you have an education, you have certain behaviors. If you don't have an education, you have certain behaviors, certain spending patterns. Demographics are going to change a little bit. We look at our workforce, is it white collar or blue collar? Obviously that's going to matter. We have about a 61% white collar community. We have about a 30% blue collar community, and we have, I think it's about a 10% is in the service industry, I guess is what it would be called. We look at household incomes. We look at our tapestry, what we call buckets. I think I talked a little bit about this in the quarterly update. We're going to, as I promised, we're going to dive deeper, to use Maritha's phrase, and we're going to look at the state of our real estate and our sales tax performance. The reason why we're looking at these is because obviously the performance of sales tax is a big factor in how the city performs. It's about 34% of our revenue stream, and we're going to look at real estate, our ad valorem values, because that's 60% of where we get our revenue streams from, and that's very, very important as far as planning and having a strategic plan. We just found out that economic development is doing very well, so what are we going to do with that knowledge? So we're also going to look at resiliency. What happens in the event of an economic downturn? What happens in a labor shortage? What happens in a pandemic, a tornado, a catastrophic event? How do we prepare for that? And what are some of the things that we need to be aware of from an economic development standpoint or from an economic standpoint overall? And how do we prepare for it? So as many of you have probably seen, these are our top employers. I'm happy to report that our largest employer, Duncanville ISD. Duncanville ISD, as you know, has 13 exemplary schools. Number one and number two reasons why people move to a community is because of schools and taxes, and they usually vacillate between the two. I know that this council is very keen on taxes and what that means to our community, and it's a very important observation, and obviously it's very important that we maintain as low a tax rate as possible because it matters, as well as services and the cost of those services.
No, is it possible that number is inflated because the Duncanville ISD is 34 square miles and we're only 11 square miles, so there's a lot of people employed outside the city limit.
Absolutely. But there's a lot of people.
Should that be decremented or should
Well, this is located in the city of Duncanville. So
those are only in the city of Duncanville.
this is the businesses or employers located in the city of Duncanville. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of these people actually live in Duncanville.
No, I'm saying work. I'm saying work.
You have some schools in DISD that are in Dallas.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I don't have those numbers. I could certainly get that for you.
Well, that's what I was saying.
I'm not aware.
I just don't want that number to be
Yeah, I didn't
cast
write.
in concrete because it may not be accurate because there's a number of schools that are outside the city limits of Duncanville.
It's a great point, and I'll look into that and see what that is. And update the council on that.
The employer is located in
That's true, but he's putting up numbers.
But everything is still in a sort of close enough radius that people would be using that.
Yeah, and I don't think you could divide that up if that's the case.
You could.
You could. I
But
don't
the
think you
number
would.
of schools actually within the city limits of Duncanville.
Yeah, but they're looking at one whole unit. They're not looking at, what's Dallas and what's the.
Every other one of these top 10 employers reside within the city of Duncanville.
That's a good point. But
Apples and apples. That's what I'm saying.
I'll see if
We'll get the-
Duncanville
we'll work on the
ISD
numbers.
does
How many-
delineate based on zip code and where.
Well, actually, all we need is how many employees are in the schools outside of the city of Duncanville, so we can get that and we'll get that back to you.
Cabinet Works, as we know, there is a supply chain shortage. We believe that's temporary. Unfortunately, many in the lumber industry as well as the construction industry, what they did is they thought that the COVID-19 was going to decrease demand, when in reality in construction industry, we all know that it did not decrease. And they shut down, or they had limited operations, and then it created a supply chain shortage. And so as they ramp up, we anticipate this is a transitional shortage as far as costs are concerned. That's everything we're reading, so we think that Cabinet Works will continue to be a large employer, and there will not be a drop off the number of employees that they have. The outlook for DFW as well as Texas is that we will continue on a positive growth trend when it comes to construction. As you know, Cabinet Works, almost every building or every home has cabinets, so we feel comfortable that that will maintain where it's at. City of Duncanville, this is one of our largest employers now. The important thing to look on this slide is the fact that we have strong employment. We have a diversified employment mix, so that's important from an economic standpoint because having our people go to work, as I mentioned earlier, making sure that citizens of Duncanville and the employers that are in Duncanville not only diversified, but they continue to be a going concern. So they'll continue to be employing people in our city and paying taxes.
Are these calculated regular full-time? Calculated up to?
Full-time equivalent,
That's
FTEs.
They're FTEs?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because I know our real numbers like 430 something like that.
That's right.
And we, I don't have to overburden this, but at the bottom of that, in the future, can we just put a date? Maybe we start using the last time we captured this date, so as of 2021. When's the last time we checked? Just,
No, I'll get you a date. That's a moving target right now.
Yeah.
But I'll get you a date. As you know, we have rain delays, we have multiple things. In fact, Mr. Ramey could probably give us a better idea possibly on that. Have you spoken to them since last time we did? No? Okay.
no, I'm just saying at the bottom of your footnote
Just
for
say,
your
you said
presentation.
estimate.
As
Just as a-
Statistically, when you pull the information.
When you pull
Yeah.
the information up, he just wants a date, like
Understand.
updated, yeah.
Okay,
As
I'll see what I
As
can
of,
Okay, we'll put that in. I thought you meant when were they opening, okay.
No, no,
628.
no. Yeah, right. But we pulled it in 2019.
So one of the things that we also look at is you're gonna see some other slides or you're gonna see some other information. You're gonna see median and you're gonna see average. Now keep in mind the difference between median and average. Average is you take a couple of numbers and you divide them by 2. Median is if you had a series of numbers like a 1, a 2, a 2, a 2, 3, and a 5. The median is gonna be the 2 and the 5, and then you're gonna divide them by 2, and that's gonna be your median number. Or it's gonna be more of a closer resemblance of what the real average is gonna be or what the median number is, because you don't wanna skew it. You might have, as an example, you might have somebody making $1 million a year, and you might have 4 or 5 people making $100,000 a year.
You
Well,
just said there's a division that occurs in a median?
no, there's not, sorry, there's not a division that
Right,
goes in the median. That's
There's
right,
not.
that's right. There's not a division, you take
Right.
the middle of it, right, that's right. It's only when you have an odd number of numbers and you have to take 2 and they're different. So if you had a 5 and a 7, then you add the 2, you divide, then you have a median.
We lost everybody now. Gus and I know.
I know what you're saying, smart people.
Gus, you're doing great. Keep going, buddy.
So this is median household income, so there's more people at that range, in this range, within the city of Duncanville. So that's your median household income, which is a good number. And I want to add that based on the analysis, Duncanville's in a great spot. Duncanville's doing very, very well, and you're going to see some of the reasons why I've come to that conclusion. And I'm sure all of you already know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Median net worth. So the median net worth here in the city of Duncanville, our population is approximately $90,000 now. What does that mean? That means their savings, it means their retirement account, the equity in their cars, equity in their homes, equity in their assets, everything that they have. This is what the median net worth is. Now, why is this important? Because if there was a loss of job, if they had to sell their home, how many homeless people would we end up with? Or what is the financial stability of our community? The other thing is disposable income. So disposable income, you'll see that we have median household income and we have median disposable income. This is after tax money. So this is going to be after they pay the tax estimated, this is what they would have to spend. It could be on their mortgage, car payment, it could be on private school, it could be on vacations, it could be on just about anything they want to spend their money on. So that would be the disposable income. Another thing we look at is 1,500 total businesses in the city of Duncanville, city limits. So this is an important number because if you look at our surrounding market, we're actually higher in total number of businesses than the other cities in our surrounding market, and they have a higher population. So we are a mature business market. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have the best businesses, as Ms. Aretha had mentioned a little bit earlier. We have to have high value revenue generating when it comes to sales tax and taxes on property values, etc. So this can be misleading. We just got to make sure that the businesses we do have are generating sales tax and are generating revenue and performing well as a going concern, etc.
But when you're marketing Duncanville, you don't have to, you talk about the tops and not the bottom part. You let them find out what type of business we have. So we highlight that we have 1,500.
That's right.
1,500
That's
businesses.
right.
Our goal is to target, how do we get that bottom to move more toward the stuff that we want?
Or make
toward
them
the
more
top.
successful, hire employees, expand, produce
Yes.
different services, expand the services they're already providing so that they can be more profitable or they can grow and add value or revitalize or redevelop their existing business. so that the value goes up. In turn, we can provide more services and our budget numbers look better and we can do more things for the community. One of the other things that we're going to look at is our education rate. So you can see that about 58% of our population is educated with either some college, a trade profession, or a graduate or bachelor's degree. Well, that's important too because that gives you an idea of what the skilled labor force is like here in our community. That means they go to work, is what that means. I'm going to try and get through.
I'm sorry, Gus. And I realize we're on a time, you're on a time clock here. Don't worry about that right now. Go back. Because I think this is important enough that, I mean, at least for me, I want to ask the question. So you talked about the 89, is that the 89,000? And you said that was a pretty good number for us, for the city?
I believe so. I would say yes, it is.
But so here's the question. To us, yes. But to a potential employer or someone who want to relocate here, such as steakhouse or whatever else, is that a good number for them to say your numbers look good?
We're going to get to that in a minute.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to dive a little deeper into that.
See, that's been my public argument, where developers only look at data without looking at our city physically.
Right.
They look at this number and they go, well, you know, look at Plano, look at Frisco, look at Colleyville, look at Louisville, and our number is a lot less than theirs. And I'm saying, well, forget the number and come look at us. Look at us and who we are as a city and how we are sustainable for where we are located, rather than comparing us to a Colleyville or a Frisco.
It even goes deeper than that, which we're going to address too.
And that's my argument when I get out in public and talk to these people.
I agree.
So, employment by industry. So this is just a snapshot of who our people are employed by or what profession they're employed in. And so I took the top 4. Retail trade was at 12.8, healthcare social service was 12.4. You can see that. So our largest employers or largest industries that our people are employed in are these here. I'd like to see more professional, scientific, and technical. I know that the community enhancement plan, that's part of it, to get more innovative entrepreneurs, technology. Those are some of the jobs we want to see. As you saw here, if we look at, we're going to get to the next slide. If we start looking at our population, what our median home values are, and we look at what they call our buckets. I call it buckets, but it's called our tapestry segmentation. This goes into what you were saying a little bit. We're going to go a little bit further. But what this tells you is who lives in our community. What's really important here is you can see from this chart here, or this bar graph here, this is in comparison to Texas, you can see that we have, exact number here, we have about 67.5% are making anywhere between $35,000 and $150,000. And so we're beating the average in Texas in that population number, which is good. So we have about 22% that are between $50,000 and $74,000. So even though we take a median of 54 or 59,000, the reality is we have a lot of people that are in this bracket, which is important to retailers. And if you look at the lower income brackets, which is also important, we're actually beating. We don't have as many, so we're doing much better. So we have about 2.8% less than the Texas average. The other important factor when it comes to our economics is we look at our age population. You can see that when it comes to U.S. average, we use the United States as a benchmark for our age groups. And you can see here that we're actually beating. We have a younger age force than the national average. And as far as our older generation, I don't want to call them non-income groups, but fixed income population. Yes, sir.
While you're on age, and you keep saying you can see, I can't see that. I can't see this.
I was thinking the same thing, but I wasn't gonna say it.
So what we have here is we have these broken out by 5-year segments. Each bar
It's a lot of information. I mean, it's a beautiful presentation.
Go stand in front of it, Greg.
But we'll make it really big.
Each bar represents 5 years. So this is 0 to 5, 9, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, 15 to 19, 20 to 24, and as we get further down, it ages. And so we can see that our median age is 36.6. Now, what's really neat is that we have our tapestry segments. So we have what they call American Dreamers, 35% of our households. Home improvement is 13% of our households. And comfortable empty nesters is 11.5%. Each one of them has a different spending pattern. It's a different demographic, different profession. Their education is different. And so these are those segments here. So American Dreamers, right now, based on the gold standard of how they categorize these individuals in our community, are somewhere in the average age of 32.5 years of age. They make about an average of, or median, of $51,000. Their services and administration, high school diploma only, GED, white and black. They own and feature-rich cell phones, sorry. They spend money carefully, buy necessities, pay bills, socialize online, listen to urban or Hispanic radio, eat at Taco Bell, Little Caesar, and IHOP. So that's one of our segments. Let me go back here for a second. Of our tapestry, these are one of the buckets that we have. We also have the second largest at 13.9% are home improvements. These are professional services, college degree, they're typically white, eat at Chick-fil-A, at Chili's, KFC, invest conservatively, shop warehouse club, home improvement stores, watch, do-it-yourself network, own a minivan or an SUV. And their median age is about 37.7, and they make on average about $72,000 a year. Now this is a good mix.
That's huge.
And then we have 11.5% in comfortable empty nesters. Now these are older population. They have about 48 median average. I just say older. I don't say they're old.
becomes old?
No, it's not old. It's an older population than this one.
Oh, hit home, huh?
Sorry. It graduates in age, I should say. But they're not older. This is actually young. 48's young. And they typically make about $75,000 a year. They play golf, ski, work out regularly. They're typically white with college degrees. They save money, invest prudently, prefer to eat at home, listen to sports radio, watch sports on TV, own 1 to 2 vehicles.
Now, this is Duncanville. You talking about
This is Duncanville. So what you have here, what's interesting is you have the where the urban ethnic enclave. We have 45% of our population is urban enclave. So what is that? That's 6 different categories. I don't think we have very many valley growers, but what these are up and coming families, professional services, college degree white, American dreamers, which we went over, urban villages, services, administration, high school diploma, Hispanic, barrios urbanos, there's services, no high school diploma, Hispanic, and southwestern families, services industry, no high school diploma, Hispanic. So there's a mix. So this 45% that you see here, this is only one section. It's made up of a mixture of these here, which is a good diversified mix. But what's also important is that we have these income levels. We have a very strong young population. And there's one other slide. I think it's this next one, right? Did you cut it out? Anyway. So what I was just going to show you was I was going to show you how many Gen Xers and how many Gen Zers we have. About 53% of our population are Gen X and Gen Z, which is really important because that's going to tell you who we can attract. Now we're going to go even deeper than that and look at how we attract, because I know this council wants us to go after businesses, wants us to go with developers and site selectors with that 4.7 million that we have to be able to utilize. Not all of it. I know but we're going to have a strategic plan on how to do that when you see the EDC's budget, which will be coming to you once I get final approval.
Source of information that's coming from, this source of information?
Esri. So Esri gathers information based on the U.S. Census Bureau, Bureau of Labor Statistics. They have consistently been the most accurate of all the other demographic study reports that have come out. So what they do is every year they take the information, they do an estimate, but they grab it from the U.S. Census Bureau, they grab it from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and then they actually they test it against what the real and true numbers end up being. And so they have consistently been the best as far as gold standard on being able to determine those numbers. So you will find some numbers that are a little bit off, but Esri is the gold standard, and we pay for it, so we're able to get that information.
And it's subject to change after the census is.
So it's good up until July of this year. So we'll get an update for the year as of this July. So the end of July, we'll have new numbers for you, which we can update and show the board and the council.
And can I ask a clarifying question on something you actually said? You said Gen Z and Gen X,
Yes,
so not millennials.
I apologize. You're absolutely right.
Okay,
Millennials
I was
and Gen Zs.
confused.
Millennials and Gen Zs. We actually have Gen X's in there as well. I thought it was in there.
Okay.
It's not.
Well, you said the 30 somethings would be millennials of those two main groups.
Right there, on that one, you just showed.
And that first.
Are they here?
Yellow.
Gen Xers right there.
No, that's not what I'm looking for. though. It was another report I had.
You must not have pulled it over. It was not on
Yeah.
purpose this time.
Okay. Anyway, so yes,
So
thank
you're
you.
talking
Thank
about
you for the
not the
clarification.
people turning 20.
So our second largest is the Gen Xers. So, but you have the Gen Z and millennials was about 53%.
Alright, so
Gen
what
Z
is
is
Gen X?
Gen X is me, 1970.
70.
Late 60s to.
69,
Yeah,
60,
late
66.
60s to like early 80s.
66.
Yeah.
66 to
My
early
parents were
80s is
boomers.
Gen X.
After the baby boom.
So you have baby boomers, then Gen X, and then you have Gen Z, and then
No,
millennials,
millennials.
then Gen Zs, and then alphas.
Alphas.
What are alphas?
Yeah.
8 to 0 or something like that. Yeah, 12 to 0 or something like that. Next generation. It's like 17.7, 17 to 0. So a generation is 17.7 years. So they're the alphas, that's the next. Now wait a minute, I'm lying to you. Alphas are next, so like the 3-year-olds down are alphas. The one in between that to the Gen Zs is another name, and I don't know it right now.
So
It's on my other slide.
so baby boomers are.
1965 and back, they were
Oh, okay.
baby boomers.
All right.
And then before them, they have a lot of different names that they call.
Greatest
the,
generation was
The Great Generation.
Greatest generation.
Oh, you don't have too many of them anymore.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'll send
you
you,
do,
I'll send you a
my
list and I'll give you
So that's the World War II people.
hold on,
And
I'm gonna
let's
look it
keep
up
going,
and I'll
because
tell you right now.
we're out of time.
All right. So these are our top 10 sales tax revenue generators. As you can see, this doesn't change. Now, this was as of May. I have the June updated numbers. And Papa's, Kroger beat Papa's again. But this is what's interesting. We're seeing a trend. Amazon is starting to come up pretty strong. You're starting to see Amazon generate sales tax for the city of Duncanville because they've made the top 10. In Marketplace, which is they're selling for a third party. There's a third party that's selling through Amazon and they're buying it. And then Amazon Fulfillment Services is where Amazon owns the product and they're selling directly. So I just wanted to point that out. But as you can-
Driving to our 2 zips.
That's correct.
We're driving into our 2 zip codes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So we're getting what I don't see on there, I've been out of this for a while, is Pioneer Foods. Are they somewhere else?
No, in the top 10
It's
of
just
this.
not
They're
top
an
10.
employer, but not.
It's not top 10.
They're a top 10, they're a top 10 employer,
Yeah.
but they're not a top 10 sales tax generator.
And how about the cabinet shop?
That was a top 10 employer, but not a top 10 sales tax generator.
Not a top 10, so where is that money going?
Well, I can tell you what their number is.
They own it, they just don't rank when it comes 1 to 10.
No, not the number, but
And
the
it
rank.
tied to where,
I can tell you
who's
what their rank
receiving
is.
the money.
Yeah.
So now they're shipping a lot of their stuff
Well,
somewhere.
help me, I was thinking we weren't getting taxes from Amazon since they're
No, we are a destination.
destination.
And we have another term which is called SLT, single local tax rate. So a vendor that doesn't have a nexus in Texas, meaning doesn't have a business or an office or any kind of operations, they can choose to pay 1.75%, not the 2%. And that'll be a rate that they pay. But these are the small companies, and you can see the top 10 are generating about 31% of the total sales tax. Other large companies, which is, that's relative. I haven't been able to determine what they use to determine large companies, but are generating the additional 67.5% of our sales.
Is that why sales tax picked up because of the Amazon 5 and?
No, I wouldn't say that. No, I don't think it's big enough to make that much. I don't think it's immaterial. I don't think it's enough to make that much of a difference.
Okay.
Okay. Now, with regard to equity attraction or investment in our community, this is really, really important. When we look at developers, that's typically what I believe is the best way to get retail or to get restaurants is to focus on developers and site selectors. Developers and site selectors are the ones that are offering the incentives, real incentives, or we're just a gap financing program. They're the ones that are gonna do tenant improvements, they're gonna build the facility for them, they're gonna buy the land, and then your restaurant, unless it's a standalone, is gonna have some sort of infill or is gonna be moving into that space. And so in order for us to be successful, we have to be able to attract investment or attract equity. And then in turn, we're gonna attract the restaurants that we talk about that are looking for our tapestry and our buckets. CC's Pizza is gonna look at different buckets. Capital Grill is gonna look at different buckets. Everyone's gonna look at different demographic or our tapestry. So the trick is to get the developer to be able to attract them and us be the gap that makes the difference. So if the market says that this should cost $1 million, but the project costs $1,050,000, then our job is to say, how do we close that gap? Whether it be through extended financing terms, favorable financing terms, amortization terms, working with a banker. Maybe we want to offer incentives, maybe we want to offer infrastructure improvements that benefit the entire region so we can continue to grow. Maybe it's landscaping, beautification. There's all kinds of, as you know, ways to do that. But the biggest thing from this slide here is This black line shows our market cap rate distribution. Now, I want to take you to bond market. If somebody came to you and said, I'm going to give you a bond that's going to pay you 10% a year, you're going to look at them and say, you're crazy. That's a junk bond, because junk bonds offer 8, 9, 10%. A solid AAA rated bond is 5, 6%, because you know that it's backed by good policy, it's backed by investment, return on investment, good management, all those different things, right? Market cap acts the exact same way. Attracting equity is about the cost of money, and what does a developer have to do in order to go get a loan or borrow the money so that the return on their investment works. And so when they see a market cap of 7.3%, you first think, that's great, I'm gonna get 7.3% return on my investment, right? And then you look at a vacancy rate and you say, that's even better, right? I have 91% occupancy, which is awesome. How is it I can have 91% occupancy with a 7.3% return on investment and market rents of 14.63? Now you probably saw that and you said, 14.63, that's cheap. I'm only paying 89 cents a square foot. What that tells you is that they're not reinvesting into their business. They have $163 a square foot average cost of value in the building. If I take you to Grand Prairie, I take you to Lancaster, I take you to Cedar Hill, that's going to be in the neighborhood of $180 a square foot. And they're going to have a 6% market cap, and they're going to have a 7% vacancy rate, okay? And that market cap is going to mean everything. That should be between 5 and 6%. So if I'm a developer and I want to invest $10 million into Duncanville, I want to know that my neighbors are reinvesting back into their building. I want to see that the buildings in the surrounding community are being taken care of and they're improving in value, because I want my $10 million in 10 years to be worth $15 million. I don't want it to be worth $8 million. So that's how we attract equity in this community. We go to our existing developments and we look at them and we say, how can we redevelop and how can we make adaptive reuse of what we're doing? And so when we look at our ad valorem and we look at our sales tax performance, sales tax being 30%, ad valorem being 60%, we have to look at it from a economic growth standpoint. And so we have a lot of properties in these areas that basically can be revitalized. And so I'm looking right now just on this because this is part of our comprehensive plan. So our comprehensive plan has identified this particular area as area 1 opportunity area. Now we have multiple, which we're also looking at. But when I look at adaptive reuse, I look at this one off of 67. I look at this one back in here for types of things like factories that can be converted into production for testing facilities for a range of technology or biotech industries. And you can see you can do a lot of things with empty warehouses and dilapidated blight, whether it be through a TIF or whether it be through economic development incentives, whether it be through bundling or a parcel assemblage, but working with a developer for a legacy type project, transformational, so as a catalyst type project. So that what we do is we take those older buildings and we increase their value, generating more ad valorem taxes and attracting equity to our community for reinvestment, and then it just grows further. Multifamily is doing great. This is a great place to invest in multifamily. That's all I'll say on that. Industrial, obviously, we're at vacancy rate is almost completely full. And we have a 6.3% market cap, which is great. You probably saw that, it's 5.5 for apartments. And we have a 5.4 vacancy rate, which is phenomenal for this area. So if you want to do apartments, we can attract that. Hospitality, going back to your, I forget who said that our hospitality was doing great. I think it was you. So you can see that of the 679 rooms, right, we had occupancy rates that were great. We had COVID, it fell, it's ticking back up. Same thing here. Market cap's a little bit high, but we had a 61% occupancy rate, and that was a 12-month period. So the decrease affected them. So that's all that is. But for the most part, as we see it come back up, you're going to see these numbers increase in value. And of course, this is 679 rooms, and this is, I believe, is an average. This is not got average daily rental. It's not a median. So you're going to have your Roadway Inns, you're going to have your Motel 6s, your Hampton Inns. It's all lumped in there. So this is a little bit skewed. When you start taking averages, it becomes skewed, right, depending on the highs and lows. You've seen this one before. We mentioned that we had sales tax performance numbers. I won't belabor this. Sales tax, I apologize for the blurriness. I don't know what happened when I pasted this on here, when I transferred it.
See, they're perfect.
But on the sales tax trends, I mean, rather than, of course, the COVID period, I mean, a moving average, I mean, we're pretty solid. I mean, I don't see anything happening with, I think we're gonna continue to see positive sales tax trends. Industry segments, Councilmember Harvey, you had mentioned, what is that segmentation? How do we break it out? And I said that we would break it out for you. So this is what you have the last month, is 20%, which was an industry segment in itself. This is how we're performing. Prior year, this is what they did in sales tax collections. This is current year, these are the decreases. You probably see something like, 74% decrease. This is gonna be in company enterprise management. These used to be Amazon. Amazon switched to a different category, and that's one of the reasons why you see such a huge decrease. This is not Amazon by itself. I'll make that clear because I can't disclose who it is exactly, but this is a combination of things. Educational services, recreational art and entertainment, you see a decrease here. Educational services, 66.6%. It wasn't a whole lot of sales tax, but I'm assuming that as of May 21, maybe there was less people buying services online, maybe they weren't buying books on educational services. It might have been some of those things. So this is the segment breakdown if you want to look at it. We had legislative change in telecom. We're no longer able to charge internet sales tax. I'm sure you're aware of that. That's why you see that significant decrease. But this goes hand in hand with the top 10 segments. And of course, this unidentified segment, which we broke down for you and identified where each individual one was and how they were performing or underperforming. So we provided that for the council as well. Trends here it is. Trends we continue to market or we continue to monitor. Millennials and Gen Z, as I mentioned, 50%. Gen X was it's not the second largest, baby boom was the second largest. So, and then we had alphas. These are 217 to present, 5.5% alphas, right? So Gen Z, millennials, these are the generations for you. Our median age is 36. We want to continue to monitor that. We want to continue to monitor our trends. This is some of the information we talked about. This is the information we'll send to our developers and site selectors, but we also got to have a strategic plan on economic development, which we'll be presenting with the budget on how we can attract equity, what plans and what things we can do to take to the future, whether it be our TIF, whether it be 380 agreements, whether it's the economic development initiatives, marketing initiatives, different types of things we'll do to try to attract equity.
So Gus, it is great talking about the trend here for Duncanville, but when you think about developers, think about we're trying to attract a different employer, do we not have to also capture some of the best Southwest cities around us to show that wealth, because we're pulling from all over the place.
Yeah, so
that's nice to see that.
We're actually, as the mayor knows, we're actually working with Best Southwest on a regional, I guess, plan. I'm going to pass this around. I figured that might be asked. So this is a report that comes out. It has some of the information. This is the Best Southwest report that says the regional impact. This is something that would go, I'm going to pass it around. That's something that would go to any developer or site selector we try to attract to bring in regional destination projects. That's what we would utilize. So we don't want to duplicate efforts. If they're already doing it, we want to utilize the efforts that they're putting into the effort.
Mr. Cook?
Well, so when I look at this though, I'll be kind of cautious of passing this around because then a developer can look at another city and select another city over us.
It's already been publicly published.
Yeah. Well, I know, but still, I'm saying, we're talking our own, but we're talking our own dog and pony show. Do we not can just wrap these numbers in without having to include the city? Let them go pull their own individual city piece.
That's where we talk about the incentives. That's where your economic developer has to pitch.
Okay.
Along with the board, and that's where we have to convince them that we have approximately $1 billion in potential for sales tax generation, and we're leaking about $500 million to our neighbors, and we're a well waiting to be tapped. The fact that we would have economic development incentives that would compete with our neighbors. We're in a very good position economically. We're a stabilized community. We have lots of businesses. We have to compete from an equity attraction standpoint. This is why. Because when they look, if the minute I go to them with a regional report, they're going to do exactly what you said. Why would I go to Duncanville as a developer if my equity or what I invest is not going to be protected? The things that a developer likes more than anything is consistency and predictability. They want to know that in the future, their value, the appreciation of their property or investment will continue. It's very important, whether it's a tourist zone, whether it's a business improvement district, whether it's a policy change, whether it's reinvestment in the community, making sure like Microsoft or Apple, they reinvest into their products. That's why they only operate at 15% profit, because they continue to reinvest in human capital, into their products, research and development, innovation, and they continue as a going concern. It's like anything else. You got to put money back into it. It's one of the reasons why we've had a challenge with some of our developers. I've met with I've met with probably 7 or 8 developers in our community. Some of them don't want to do anything to their building. And it's been a challenge convincing them to apply, which we're getting them to start coming around using some of the teeth we have in Public Works to make sure they're compliant with some of their issues.
Good.
And so we're going to them and saying, well, we're not doing it on purpose. We just naturally have someone with teeth in our Public Works department. We make sure they're compliant. And so we go to them and we say, how can we help you get you where you need to be? Maybe we can offset some of those costs. Maybe we can help with some facade improvements. That's something you should do to improve your value, et cetera, which offset whatever you got to spend to get in compliance.
Good.
So those are some of the strategies we're using.
Can we get a copy of this?
We're gonna get you a drive with all of the slides on it. We just we've been moving around, moving parts, like I changed some of his colors to surprise him when he got there today, so.
So this is just a slide on resiliency. It talks about our poverty level. We're at about 15% poverty level, which is a decent, strong number. You'll see it in some of those reports. We're on average with some of our neighboring cities. We're a little bit higher than some, a little bit better than others. We're better than Dallas County, which is good. We have, and that's important because that shows you that in the event of a catastrophic issue, or if something were to happen like a pandemic or anything else, do people have medical care? Can they survive? Can they, are they going to be a burden to this community? Are they going to be homeless? As an example, do they have medications, et cetera? That's it.
Good job.
Thank you.
Well done.
And I'll also say, well done. I think this economic development piece is really a strong piece, and we shouldn't take it for granted that a time constraint will allow us to rush through it, because it is too important for the city for us to move forward with this economic development piece. It really is too important. If we're talking about having our sales tax would never catch up with our property tax. But if we don't spend more time with this economic development piece, we have no way of trying to even get halfway there. So I think we need to, so if Gus is having 20, I'm just using for example, if Gus has 25 minutes, then maybe Rainey needs 15 minutes. Because I like to spend more time on economic development as we talk about trying to increase where the city needs to go. Truly, this type of information will get us there.
What I'd like to do, and that's why when he and I talked about it, because we have some more slides, is we've done a couple of economic development updates. I just want to do a council briefing so that we can go through and spend some time like this, and all we talk about is economic development. Okay. This is just how it impacts the next year's budget projections, but when it comes down to his long-range plan, he's got some ideas. He had pictures, he had graphs, he had examples of types of things that we want to do, but I want to be able to spend time, but I don't want to get too far off of the budget part to get to the economic development. That's why we're kind of moving through this portion of it, but I do want to schedule a briefing so that he can spend time, not in a council session, where we can just talk through his 3-month observation and what he has and what's his plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Way to go, Gus.
Working on being cheerleaders for each other.
All right, we are transitioning now after that presentation into.
You're up again.
I am. I'm sorry. Would you like me to sing? She sings. That was weird. Okay. No. We are transitioning into the revenue portion. We're going to be talking about the different revenue things that impact our revenues moving into this next fiscal year. And the best topic of all, I'm sure amongst all of us, is talking about the tax rate. So let's just dive right on in. As you'll know, and the tax rate that we are charged as citizens when we pay on our home consists of various variables. It's not just the city that you're paying your taxes on. How it breaks down based on the 2020 certified values is what I'm using here, and the 2020 rates. This is how it breaks down on the current Duncanville resident paying their tax. The school district captures 50% of the total tax. The city captures 26% of the total tax. Then you have in the smaller areas, the Parkland Hospital, Dallas County, and the Dallas County Community College District. That is how where your money goes when you pay your taxes. This is a chart to show you how we compare with the best Southwest. You can see where we've trended over the years. Duncanville is this black line right here, and for many years we've been very constant. In the last few years, we've been able to reduce down that rate, and of course last year we reduced it down quite significantly. Cedar Hill has remained low and stable. Now this is the green line here, and then Lancaster has been consistently up on the top. Just for statistic purposes, this chart here represents the residential taxable value per capita, so it's capturing per citizen in Duncanville, what is that average taxable value? And this is how we stack with our best Southwest cities, Duncanville being here in the blue. From a tax levy perspective per capita, Duncanville is on the bottom here, so what this really is telling you is that the tax burden per capita on the residential side, we have the least tax burden amongst our sister cities. Seeing the historical information here on just the city's portion of your tax, what's been paid over time. As you can see how it's trended upwards quite significantly over the last 10 years. The history of our average taxable values, as you can see how they have gone up year after year, and that daily cost currently, again based on the 2020 numbers, that the cost for us, for all of those that work out of the general fund, the fire, the police, the public works, everything costs you $3.22 a day for our services. So, getting into the conversation about the calculation of the tax rate. Currently, our tax rate, this is what we set last year. What we are, this budget is based on the revenues that we are projecting. We are not projecting, recommending a tax rate increase. That the projected no new revenue rate, for those that are not as familiar with the these rates, the no new revenue rate is a calculation of if our values went up X percent, this would be the rate we would have to pay if we did not want to raise any more revenue, if that makes sense. So your values may go up, but if the tax rate is down, that would be a net, a zero flat property tax revenue for us. The voter approval rate basically is that 3.5% cap. If we were to propose a rate that would go above that, that's what would trigger the going to the citizens to approve the voter, to approve the tax rate. So again, right now, our budget is built on having a tax rate that it remains unchanged. In terms of the values that we are using in this revenue, and you'll see it later when we get into the general fund revenues, I'll break it down a little further, but the estimate that we're using comes from the preliminary numbers that we're getting from DCAD, and they have said that they're going to remain relatively flat. We're seeing about a 2% increase in the values so far. So that is what we are projecting to hit the general fund revenue increase there. This down here just kind of shows you, again, based on 2020 certified taxable value, what that penny on the tax rate number is. So 253,000 is what that comes to on that calculation. So. And just to break it down here for you again, the city's portion, the tax that you pay, that average taxable, that average value there that we pay, or that the citizens would pay, is $1,176 of their tax would go to the city of Duncanville based on that single family value right there of 164,000. This just breaks it down of what the percentage of that money and where it goes. So general government finance gets 16% of your tax, and that comes to 51 cents a day. Parks and Rec, 12%, Public Works, 21%, and police and fire getting the bulk of that. So that's really it on the tax rate.
Questions?
Do y'all have any questions about that?
We're gonna talk more when we talk about proposed revenue, a little bit more where we're seeing this, but what Jennifer and I talked about a little bit is that you've heard us say that it's gonna be flat or either go down. We've looked at where we are with the preliminary numbers as of now and compared it to where it was last year. And that's where the 2% is coming in. And so it looks like it'll be about 2% above. So as of right now, you may see in our numbers we're getting a 14% increase, but they do anticipate a number of challenges. And so that's why you've seen them stay flat. The other thing we heard, and I think we've shared with you early on, is that they did not have enough sales in Duncanville to create any major changes. But everyone who's talked to people, you've gotten higher bills, but not where you see the others. The other thing you see in our other communities is a lot of new construction that's supplementing some of the changes. I've looked at, for example, Hutchins. If you look at their numbers, when they give us the number, they give us everyone's number. And you'll see a much higher percentage increase at this time, 30 to 40%, but a lot of that is on new construction and things like that. And the issue with us being built out affects that. And so if things remain consistent, they've also made it easier to challenge. One note that I will point out to you is that when meeting with the other city managers, the conversation was, your husband's school sent letters to all of our residents about how to challenge their taxes. And they sent me a copy of it because I hadn't seen it. So as a college project in the MBA school at UTD, they sent letters to all the residents in Cedar Hill and Lancaster and DeSoto, or random residents, saying, do you know you can challenge your tax bills? And so it's a project they're working on. So things like that are kind of complicated. And as we look at this, they're also moving to online challenges. So they're making it a lot easier now to challenge your tax bills. And so we know that even though right now I think we're at like 14% or something like that, we know that that's going to go down as the challenges start to come in. And so we believe a net will be about 2% at the end.
Okay. This is a fun one. Forgive me, I have this out of order. The next presentation is actually going to be Steve Wakeland, our fire marshal. He's going to come up here and present. Let me jump to his slides. Forgive me that I have them out of order.
Again, my name is Steve Wakeland. I'm your fire marshal. We're just here to talk about master fee schedule for the fire department. As you can see, there has been an increase in the fee schedule through the fire department, but most of it went to ambulance bills. And so there really was no fire fee schedule that has been increased since fiscal year 12-13. So we're right about 10 years behind. So after conducting a survey of the best Southwest cities, Cedar Hill, DeSoto, and Lancaster, we're just recommending the following additions and/or revisions to the current fire permit fees to adhere to the adopted IFC 2015 Fire Code and to meet our area standards. Down here at the bottom, this special section here, permits required. A property owner or owner's authorized agent who intends to conduct an operation or business or install or modify systems and equip that are regulated by this code, or to cause such work to be performed, shall make first application to the fire code official and obtain the required permits. So what we've kind of done is just went through here and looked at the IFC, and there's two kinds of permits that the IFC recommends or looks at: operational permits and construction permits. Your operational permits are going to be your 4th of July events, your Cinco de Mayo, all your parties and stuff like that. It's like a one-time fee. And then also like your certificate of occupancy. Whenever we come out to a business and the business applies for a CO, it's a one-time fee until they stop business and somebody else takes over. Your construction permits are going to be all your permits for your sprinklers, your alarms, your hood systems, anything like that that would have to do with fire protection. And that's not only new builds, but that's also modifications. So if they have to have a permit for a modification, then that's what the construction permit would fall under. So I actually only have 9 new or adjusted fees that I'm presenting to y'all. And then we're gonna go into some stuff that the IFC is already in our code. So battery systems with the liquid capacity over 50 gallons, we're seeing a lot of new solar panels. And with those solar panels, they have a battery, some have a battery backup. I'm not saying all of them will, but there is the potential for this. Stop real quick right there. So the little red dots up here at the top, red is Cedar Hill, green, blue is DeSoto, and green is Lancaster.
I changed it to black.
Oh, black, it was green a while ago. Now it's black. So, so we have red, blue, and black. So if you see one of these stars underneath the fees, that's the cities that are already adopting these fees. So we reached out to them and asked them, you know, what their take on it was. And so this battery system, this looks like Lancaster. We're charging $75 for it. We increased it we're asking to increase it by $25 to get us up to $100, which is what Lancaster does. Smoke control systems, it's a new system at $75. Food trucks, that's something that the council is looking into. This needs to be checked really good with the LP gas systems. All that LP gas system has to be spray tested and checked for leaks. It's a new fee of $50. We're not collecting any money on food trucks as we get ready for 4th of July. We've had several come to the station over the past week and a half. We haven't collected any money on those for the inspections. So we need to get up to time with that and start collecting for us doing an inspection on these food trucks. Now, on food trucks with a hood system, those are actually on a 6-month rotating because we have the hood's only good for 6 months. So they have to come back to us in 6 months and have it done again. So we put those on a 6-month rotation instead of an annual. This is some new fees right here. All the cities are actually doing these. The assisted livings, the nursing homes, the group homes, healthcare facilities, and child care facilities, or child and adult facilities. We just assigned some fees to them. You can see those, but as you can also see, the other 3 cities are all already collecting these fees. We're behind. We haven't been doing these at all. So these are fees that we could be collecting. And then it was asked to, this bottom side here, fire sprinkler systems over 1,000 heads. It was asked to put the full fee schedule in there, and because we were at 2 different locations, I couldn't get that to her in time to get onto the slide. But we basically have a fee schedule that says 1 to 25 heads is $25, 26 heads to 100 heads is $50. Anyway, when it gets up to 1,000 heads, we were charging 30 cents, and the area price is 33 cents per head. We're not going to see that much. The new warehouse up on Duncanville Road, 350,000 square feet, probably going to see that. But there could be a cap. We could just say, okay, X number, and stop them, you know, if the number's getting too large. Somebody comes in and buys Masco and they want to redo the whole sprinkler system because there's 3 city blocks. It could get up, that number could get over 1,000 heads. So that's the reason why we're asking to increase that number. Reinspection charge for no-shows. We have a big problem. We have a problem. We set up a inspection and the tenant never shows up. So what we are requesting is to add a $50 fee that if they really want us to come out, they're going to pay $50 for us to come that second time because they never showed up on the first time.
A question there though.
Yes.
And I know that's procedurally, you'll tell us that later, but is that are we giving them the time, or we're saying we'll be here from 8 to 5?
No. The fire department has changed their thing. We called them, we set up the time with them, and it's not all of us anymore. The fire department is taking on we call them physically, we said, what time do you want us to be there? They tell us and we show up, and we're giving them 15 to 20 minutes. We're not just driving up there, they're not there, and we're driving away. We're sitting, and waiting to see if they show up. And there's no phone calls. or they just don't show up.
And you said that's revised, or we've been doing it all along?
No, we have not. This is a new fee. Yeah, they just, like I said, if you look, the other three cities are doing it. And so we haven't been. We usually been the counter gentler and
I didn't hear an answer to this question. It's like, when typically, we'll say we'll be there sometime between 12 and 4, but we'll call you 20 minutes ahead of time. Is that what you're saying?
we're not calling them and telling them we're gonna be there 20 minutes before. We call them and ask them, what time do you want us to meet you there? They say 9 o'clock, we show up at 5 minutes till 9.
How is the day and the window set?
Talking with the tenant.
Yeah, they're making an appointment.
Yeah, we're making an appointment with the tenant.
So I think the question is, how long does it take to get an appointment? So if I called you from an Alpha company today, how long before, what's the window of opportunity for me to get an appointment? How long do I have to wait for an appointment?
Depending on how many call me in a day, we're usually getting to them either the next day, within 2 days. Our inspections are coming out, they're calling me, I'm looking at Pam's schedule, and if she's free, I'm scheduling them on the 1 hours, so that she has an hour to go, and we're pushing them out.
And I'm only saying that too, because definitely if we're gonna charge, excuse me for staying up, that's kind of correct. If we're gonna charge, we have to be more efficient in making sure that we're charging, that we're going to respect time for staff as well as the person we're going to visit their business.
Right. And that's why we're saying we'll be there at 9 o'clock, and then we give them till 9:15, 9:20. If they're not there, then we move on to the next one. You know, it's not just the only one that we're having that day. We're having to move on to, yes, sir?
Who's done that inspection?
Pam McAllister is doing all of our CO inspections, and I'm handling a lot of the business inspections while she's doing the COs.
Okay, so it's not a fire company.
No, sir, it's us. It's fire prevention.
You know, the reason I bring that up is if it was a fire company and that car will run, would there be variance?
No, sir. No, sir. Yeah, it's not that. It's one of us. And if we schedule it and we miss it, then there would not be a $50 charge because it would be on us. Now, there have been times that I've caught a fire and had to go and had to reschedule. And, but she is a dedicated inspector and her job is to do that. And so when she makes unless something just really, really bad happens, you know, she's usually on that call. Additional acceptance tests on our fire protection systems. So we go out, we usually give them one freebie. We give them their initial and one freebie. But there's times that we go out there, they say they're gonna fix it, they don't. Then we go back and it's still not fixed. So after that, we're gonna start charging $75 for every time we have to come back out, because it's just, it's just getting redundant. You know, we're going to the same place to look at the same thing and they're not doing anything about it. So, here's one of the bigger ones right now is the false alarms. And these come to the motels, basically. Smoking in the motels, they're setting off the smoke alarms, and we are responding out there, and we have a way of tracking it in our Red NMX, which is our fire system that tells us what calls we go on. If we get disregarded, show up and it's a false alarm or something like that, that's where these numbers would come from. But let's say 1 to 3 apparatus dispatched, if you get 3 calls to that location in a year, we're not going to give them a citation. 4 to 5, we're going to give them a $200 citation for 4 and 5. And then 6 and 7 goes up to $250, and then 8 or more, it's $300 every time we go out there after that 8. So 8 and more. It's going to be a lot of, and that's, like I said, that's open to discussion, but again, who is it? Did you change it to black? Okay, so that's going to be Lancaster. Lancaster does that too, because they get a lot of false calls also. And then the bottom one down here is just a pyrotechnics thing they put in the IFC. If we have to send people out to do standby, it's $50 per hour per person for us to stand by at their pyrotechnics. Go ahead.
Mr. Wakeland, I have a question. And so these are new charges. Now, who would be in charge of collections?
So we had that discussion earlier today, and Angelica is our permit tech. And so we're going to, let me back up. This isn't something that's gonna happen overnight. This is, if y'all agree to allow us to start charging these fees, it's gonna take a little bit because we're changing from MyGov to an InterGov system. So all these fees would have to be downloaded into the InterGov system. And then we're going to talk with Angelica about helping us out on this. And the main reason is we talked with finance. Finance says she wants the money collected in one place. She doesn't want money all over the place. She wants it collected in one central location, whether it's Angelica or a person of her choice, to sit at a desk and this is all she does. That's going to be her job or Angelica's job. But she just doesn't want the money being taken in at Station 2, up here, Station 1. She wants everything funneled to one place, so the permit would be applied for and paid for at a central location. So that's the plan now, but it's open to changes. Yes, sir.
So if I heard you correctly, you all are changing software systems?
The city is.
Oh, the city is not.
No,
not you.
no.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we're going to the InterGov system.
Okay.
And so everybody's in training for that right now to get that up and running.
Okay, I thought it was your department.
Oh, we've already been through ours and we're still, okay.
All right.
Okay, so operational permits. These are actually already adopted by the city. If you look on our fee schedule now, you'll see two lines that just says IFC. And these are the fees that, under that IFC, the 2015 IFC, these are the fees that are on there. And so basically all I did was just, we don't have to adopt all of them, we don't have to adopt any of them, but these are the fees that IFC 2015, which has been adopted already, says that we can charge for. And so some of them apply, some of them don't. I'm just going to touch on a couple. Amusement buildings, number 2 there. We actually have a recording studio in the city now that built a building inside of a building, and it classifies as an amusement building. So we would be getting $100 a year off of him because he would be required to register his building. So that it's more of a safety thing for us to get in to make sure that the building hasn't changed or all the doors are operating and there's they haven't turned off any of the lights or anything like that, so that the strobe lights are still working like they're supposed to. Carnivals and fairs, we haven't really had a lot, but I remember over off of Skyline, the tortilla factory put on a carnival not too long ago, had the huge tents and all that stuff, so there would be a fee for that. Combustible dust producing operations. One of them would be Masco or Cabinet Works. Cabinet Works has the multiple dust collectors on the outside of their buildings, and we put out several of them when they catch on fire. So that would be a revenue.
Can I interrupt here? What we're looking at are things that are going to have to come to City Council for approval.
Already approved.
You're changing fees.
These fees were adjusted in the 2015. Like I said, if you look on our pay scale right now, IFC is already there.
Information. This is a budget workshop that
Yes,
I would expect to see a slide that says, as a result of these proposed operational fees, this is the impact on the budget. Rather than going down in the weeds and digging into all this stuff, we as a council can see what's the impact on budget of what you're talking about.
Okay. Your number, it's not a big number. There's only 200 businesses that would be affected by this for a number of $13,000 to $15,000 revenue.
Thank you.
That's.
Anybody else need to see this drill down as we go granular for?
I'm good.
All right, thank you very much, Steve.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, that's not yours.
Chief? We'll take care of that.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. This shouldn't take very long. We'll be out of here at your desired time of 9 o'clock. You will have 2 documents presented to you. The first document is a legislative update. It's dated June 25th. It's the latest information from the Texas Municipal League. And you should also have a second document, which is a letter that the Texas Municipal League drafted to our governor that's talking about the rescue funds. So as you know, our state legislators recently completed the 87th regular legislative session. And Governor Abbott announced that he will convene a special session that's starting on July the 8th of this year. And the agenda items will be announced soon for the special session. Now, there are potential legislative issues from the 87th regular session and special session that it could impact our city financially. And so we just wanted you to know that we are monitoring all of the city-related bills that were passed to determine what, if any, changes we need to make to our proposed budget for this fiscal year, as well as future budgets and city operations. And the Texas Municipal League continues to monitor legislation to determine if there are any city-related bills that will impact local governments. And so the first document that I want to briefly go over, realize that you can read, but I think it's very important that we just touch bases very quickly. If you'll turn to this document at the very bottom, let's look at the paragraph that says, on June 22nd, the League, which is the Texas Municipal League, submitted this letter. That is the second letter that you have that's addressed to the governor. It says to Governor Abbott, encouraging him to formally request $1.4 billion in federal stimulus dollars earmarked for smaller Texas cities under the American, I can't talk, I'm tired, I'm ready to go home. Rescue Plan Act of 2021. It says, under the act, most cities over 50,000 population have received their allocated revenue funds. That has happened. For cities that are over 50,000, they have already begun to get their dollars. Cities under 50,000, we have not gotten those funds. Basically, what the Texas Municipal League is asking the governor to do is request those funds from our federal government. And so once those funds come to the state, then the state will begin to distribute those funds to smaller cities, cities under 50,000 population. So essentially what we wanted you to know that there are a lot of bills that have passed. The governor recently vetoed 20 bills. Of those 24 are city-related bills. If you open that page, you'll see those 4 related city bills that have been vetoed by the governor. I'm sure after this special session has concluded, there will be additional bills that will be vetoed. At this point, we simply do not know all of the city-related bills that's going to impact the city. But what we hope to do is work very closely with the Texas Municipal League. We're going to work with our city attorney to determine the specific bills that's going to impact our budget. So I can't tell you all of those bills at this point. I can go back, for example, to share with you 2 city-related bills that took effect on September the 1st of 2019. Senate Bill 944, which is basically preserved and archived public information. And essentially what that means is our IT department is having to keep all of the data that comes through our city for future reference. So Tracy, you want to just talk briefly about that?
It speaks specifically to the cell phone usage, really, text messaging and stuff like that. So,
Close.
so 944, it speaks to that more specifically. So text messages between, say, myself and Keith Brown here would have to be archived if they had. So there's been a push to supply city supplied cell phones, so that way we can archive those texts. and get them into a platform where we can reproduce if we're asked for them. So it's an Open Records Act.
But
So
from a
another-
fiscal standpoint, that means that that's more storage, and so the reason we talk about how does this fall into our budget is we start to look at capacity from our technology. That means we have to create other mechanisms of storage and cost associated with that.
The telecom provider has to download that data in order to put it in storage here as well.
We're actually using a provider called Telemessage for it. So they actually capture that from our provider.
That's what I'm saying, it's a third party push
Yes.
in order to get that stuff, you don't have direct access.
No.
I mean, if I send a text to chief, it's gonna move through another access before you can actually get it into your system.
Oh, exactly, yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Okay.
And so another bill, for example, House Bill 3834, it was also approved and took effect on September the 1st, 2019. And essentially what that means is that cybersecurity training, every employee of the city is responsible for completing cybersecurity training. And so these are two bills, for example, that impacted our budget. And so there will be additional bills that's going to impact our budget. We just don't know what those are. We're just letting you know that once we know what they are, we will act accordingly. And there could potentially be some cost. Told you I'd be through before 9. Any questions? No questions?
Mayor, we segue in this conversation about the American Recovery Act. If we could do that and then end, I think that'll be a quick update on where we are. I think that completes our revenue section.
Yes. The impacts to the
Impacts.
revenue anyway. Yes. Okay, so American Rescue Plan. This is what we know as of today regarding the American Rescue Plan. We have been allocated up to $8.45 million. This coverage period goes from March of 2021 through December 31st of 2024. So that is the period that this money can be spent. The costs that are incurred by December 31st of 24, and they must be expended by December 31st of 2026. So basically, you can incur the cost for what we ultimately decide how to spend that allocation. We have until December of 2024 to incur those costs, and December of 2026 to actually spend it. Okay, this is what Mr. Brown was talking about. The funds will flow from the state to the city. Again, we have not received this funding yet, and they're still deciding on how.
But according to the letter, Abbott hasn't requested the funds in the first place.
Right. So to reiterate that, but this is what, again, projected to come to us. The funds will be sent to the city in two pieces. 50% of the allocation will be no later than 30 days after the state receives that funding, okay? And then the remaining 50% of that allocation after the state receives the second distribution, which will occur no later than 12 months of receiving the first distribution from the Treasury. That makes sense. There are 4 different categories of what the federal government has identified as eligible uses for these. Now, this is still a work in progress to nail down specifics of what those eligible uses are, but this is pretty much the broad category that as we understand it today in terms of those eligible uses. So number 1, public health and economic impact. So costs that are relating to responding to COVID-19 or mitigating COVID-19, behavioral health needs, payroll and benefits for public health and safety workers, primarily that are dedicated to COVID-19. Responding to negative economic impacts, so implementing measures to enable safe resumption of tourism, travel, and hospitality services, rebuilding public sector capacity to the pre-pandemic levels, small business support, and then the hardest hit communities like housing, education, things like that. And this comes from the federal, again, guidelines of how they've explained this category. So it may not necessarily relate to Duncanville specifically in every bullet point. The second one is premium pay for eligible workers. So the criteria here, they must be essential employees. We're all essential, public safety, fire, police, things like that, the street workers. It can be used retroactively. It can be provided directly or through grants to private employers, public health safety staff, and essential workers outside the public sector. So that is the bullet points of the premium pay for eligible workers. Eligible use number 3, loss of revenue. This one gets a little complicated. So the guidelines, how we understand them, for how you calculate the loss of revenue, take your base year in fiscal year 2019, there's applied growth rate that we would apply to that based on the growth rate from the past 3 fiscal years. There's a multiplier in there. We have to do a comparison of what would have grown, what the growth would have been versus what we actually collected. And then we have to exclude, there's some things that we cannot factor into that calculation, such as any federal transfers, internal transfers, revenues from utilities, water supply, things like that, refunds, correcting journal entry transaction, things like that, or proceeds from issuance of debt.
Good news is they sent out a calculator that you can put the numbers in, so we don't have to figure it out ourselves.
Yay. Because, it's all great.
Yes.
The last, continuing on in the loss of revenue, this recouped revenue, once we figured out that calculation, can be used for governmental services that directly provide services or aid to citizens, maintenance pay, pay-go of building. It can be used on capital projects together with bond financed portion, or can start a project and finish with future revenue bonds, cybersecurity, healthcare services, things like that. The recouped revenue cannot be used for principal or interest debt, so debt payments basically, or our operational reserves, rainy day funds, as they call it. So this one's kind of a complicated one, and we'd have to definitely utilize that tool that they can provide. The biggest one that I dare say at this point that I could see us recommending usage of this money would fall into the investment of infrastructure, investments in water, sewer, as well as infrastructure of broadband. So basically, how they have defined it so far, necessary investments are designed to provide an adequate minimum of level of service and are unlikely to be made using private sources of funds. The uses must align with the Environmental Protection Agency's clean water and drinking water Clean Water Revolving Fund and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund to expedite project identification. That means building and upgrading facilities, distribution and storage systems, replacement of lead service lines, invest in wastewater infrastructure projects. We have a number of those. Building broadband infrastructure with updated and modern technologies, as well as assisting households to be able to access, you may not have access to internet or digital literacy.
So what you're going to find here is very similar to the CARES funding, is the Department of Treasury constantly comes up with guidelines. Some of them stay consistent, some of them change. And so what we're monitoring is the use. If you talk to some of our neighbors, some are talking about things like a water tower. And so as we start to look at these big projects, as we get into that next expenditure phase, we're going to look to see what in this scenarios that's not covered in our budget that we may be able to attribute it to this. So we're not going to jump into it head first. We will create, as we did in the past, a separate funding area where we house that money so that we're spending out of that fund that's just for it. But we're going to do some scenarios. We're going to have, after we understand and know that we're getting the money, then we're going to bring it back to you to say, does this make sense to you? Because I don't want us in a vacuum saying, this is what we want to do, but I'm going to ask our folks to categorize it. We just have to be careful because we understand that this is one time. And so this is for one-time types of things, but there are things out there that we need to do. And it kind of goes in, especially when you get to the drinking water and the water, some of the stuff that happened as a result of our ice storm, we may be able to finesse that into some of the boxes here. But just so you'll know, you're going to hear when we get past revenues into our projections that we are not projecting this into the revenue because this is a one-time fund. But we don't know if it's going to be 6 months, 12 months, or when the governor's going to make that request. So that's why we are not putting this when you get to that next conversation with us.
But one thing you do have to do is project the expense of collecting and compiling this information.
Yes.
There's gotta be, I'm looking at, thank you to our federal government for putting a burden on our city on the X number of people to capture all this stuff. And I'm thinking, now, I don't know what the staffing is in terms of what we have today, but I'm guessing that we do not have the staff to be able to capture and compile and report all this information unless it's gonna sit on your desk, because you're the guru, you just said so. No, I'm being serious. This is gonna cost an enormous amount of money come out of
I
our
had more money in
personnel costs.
Petersburg and I didn't have to do all that you all did in Texas when I got it directly. So what you had to do for the county was very different than other cities who received CARES funding. The audit process and everything that you did was not required by the federal government. That was a state mandated requirement, not a federal mandated requirement.
But this is federal.
So this is not a requirement. They have not come up with, you've got to track and you've got to, all those receipts and things that you all were doing and all of the documentation, I can tell you is Texas specific. I know DC, I know Maryland, and I know Virginia. This was because in your last funding, you came
It's
through the county.
utopian to think they're gonna give us $8.5 million and not require the receipts to show what we used it for.
28 million went to Petersburg.
Wow.
Okay.
I don't care.
It's not about
This-
receipts,
this-
it's an
this
audit.
is a- this is
Well,
a
it's not an
new
argument with you. What
This
I'm
is a new administration.
Exactly, who I'm very close to. So, as I'm telling you from someone who does know the administration, is the way this is set up with the treasurer is, yes, just like when you get FEMA money, you may get a reimbursement for FEMA. You need to keep your receipts, absolutely, because they may come back and audit you. But they are not making this so cumbersome that you are not putting this money where you need to do it. What happened in Texas and what I've seen in your CARES funding is you didn't do half the stuff that other people did because you had such stringent requirements it became difficult. For example, your small business grants. You all didn't put money in small business grants because it was too difficult for the businesses. You asked for more information than was required from other places, but that was set by the county, not the federal government. They didn't have those. They gave you the buckets and they said spend it. But our cities and our counties, as somebody who managed a lot more money than you got, didn't have those requirements. And so I'm working, I have very close assistant secretaries of treasury who are on this process. It's not gonna be too complicated.
I hope you're right. I'm
It
gonna
won't
be
be.
very
You guys did a
skeptical.
great job last
I
time.
am very skeptical that it's not gonna cost us a bucket of money to control this money after we get it.
You'll be fine.
I hope you're right.
You'll be fine. Yes, sir.
I was just gonna say, it's out there, watch it, and then we'll make a decision when the time comes. Just because something's out there doesn't mean we have to take advantage of it.
And we don't wanna throw away $8.5 million either.
We'll know when we get there.
I hope you're right, Aretha.
You
really
have one
do.
person tracking it
I
before.
really do, because this is a bucket of red tape that's about 2.5 miles high.
I don't believe so, but we'll see and we'll
I know you
monitor
don't believe so. I'm telling you, I hope you're right.
it. I'm a good Democrat, so I believe in our process.
But I'm
And a
not.
Republican. On Wednesdays, on Thursdays, and sometimes Fridays.
You're right, there's money. That offsets what we're gonna do, and yes, it could offset.
Oh, I know, the personnel costs required to monitor this program can come out of that. But it's still gonna mean, we gotta put staff, we gotta make staff.
Well, that's part of the lean, and so we're gonna have this discussion, but that's part of why you have a real good finance director who's here, so we can look at what it takes to do it. I believe that there are gifts you get and there are gifts you don't get. And there are lots of things that we have to do that we can utilize it for. What we created in the last CARES funding from a management standpoint was a very good tracking system. They separated the funds and TIA managed the heck out of it. Now, I know we don't have a TIA, but we do have some TIAs in training, and so what we're gonna work on internally is, I don't wanna look a gift horse in the mouth because we've got some expenditures that we're gonna talk about tomorrow that far exceed our revenue that we have available, and we have to be prepared. But we don't wanna just say, oh my God, it's gonna be horrible, because this might be a good thing, and turning it away may not be to our advantage at this time.
Okay, so we're going to wrap it up tonight, and tomorrow, as I understand it, we're gonna pick up with, Nadina? Is that right?
I don't think I got that one.
We're gonna pick up with the revenue outlook, general fund.
Yeah, we're on revenue outlook. We're up here, we did the tax rate.
Not the cost.
What? Sanity?
Oh, chocolate, absolutely.
Yeah.
You got one right there?
That's the one.
You gotta do the breakdown, you're right.
So, yeah, that's what we're,
This is where we're gonna be.
yeah,
And we'll have cool weather too.
Put the
I'll be
revenue.
ready.
Yeah, really.
I have 908 at the time.
Well, first of all, are you okay with, stopping? We can go till midnight if you want to.
Yeah, let's go to mid.
So we can finish the revenue so that we only have expenditure tomorrow. It's not a lot more to talk about in revenues, if you don't mind.
I say let's go.
And then we'll have only expenditures tomorrow and capital.
All right, so timestamp, what do you got?
I said let's
9/11.
finish.
Let's continue the revenues today.
That's where I believe. Finish the revenue.
They said continue, they said keep going.
Which will limit your time tomorrow. We won't be just in one, because tomorrow we have the expenditures, which is much more complicated.
How much time are we talking about? With revenue?
Without cutting it short. I don't wanna get.
How about we go and then we stop at enterprise? Let's get the general fund covered and then we'll stop. Okay? Unless I don't see.
You didn't answer my question. How much time is this gonna take?
We can make it short or we can make it fast. What would you like?
When we go through budget, we don't need to just kind of make shortcuts and rush it.
So I'm worried about us not finishing tomorrow if we don't get at least halfway there. So
What's gonna leave it up to you? You either can, invest another hour tonight, or we can put it on tomorrow night and be at 11 o'clock.
I don't think it'll go till 11 o'clock tomorrow night, but I think.
If we add this on.
This, what we're looking at, where we're going now, is the basis for our future.
Right, that's why I don't wanna rush through it.
Right, and that's what I'm thinking. We've been here for 3 hours already. And I think in terms of being able to focus and understand and their time to be able to present, I think we ought to wrap this thing up tonight. This is where we're going. This is the next year of our responsibility and the mantle of our responsibility. And I would like to stop tonight and start here tomorrow.
I'm fine with that, however, just when we get to tomorrow, let's not try to cut it short because our time is stretching out.
We're not cutting anything. If we gotta go a third day, we'll go a third day.
And I'm fine, as long as we don't, as long as we get to the session to say, you got 3 minutes.
No, what I'm saying is this is our future. We are now all this is background. Where we're going with this stuff, this is our future.
Yeah, I'm fine as long as we have time tomorrow. Or push it to the third day if you need.
I think
I don't want, I'll tell you, I don't want us to get to tomorrow and say, can you consolidate this and make it shorter now?
I think you're gonna be fine tomorrow, and the reason you'll be fine is your prior years, you talked about where the trends and why they are what it is. So when we start talking about, these are very preliminary projections. This is not the budget we're presenting to you. So at the early projections, and then you'll have a chance also, because you have your slides, is to kind of look through them and develop any questions of the data in advance of us coming back tomorrow.
We'd be okay if Gus didn't go on so long.
Look at your stuff, and also everybody can review for the next year's information that we're providing.
9:14.
I'm happy to accommodate you, Councilmember.
You want us to present against that?
We're adjourned or we're recessed?
It's up to you now.
We are adjourned, 9:14.